Okay. All right. Are we live streaming and everything? Good? Okay. All right. Okay. Good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning for a special joint meeting of the Cleveland City Planning Commission, Landmarks Commission, the Downtown Flats Design Review Advisory Committee, and the Historic Warehouse Design Review Advisory Committee. We would like to call the meeting to order at this time. In compliance with notification requirements of Ohio's open meeting law, under COVID-19 emergency declaration, notice of this meeting has been publicly posted. All boards and commissions under the purview of the City Planning Department conducts its meetings according to Robert's Rules of Order. Actions during the meeting will be taken by voice vote. Abstentions from any vote due to a conflict of interest should be stated for the record prior to the taking of any vote. All meeting activity is being recorded. These proceedings are also being live streamed via YouTube and TV 20 for our viewing audience. All public comments have been received via the City of Cleveland Planning Commission website and email at the City of Cleveland email page for City Planning. Copies of all comments have been distributed to all members of the committees and commissions prior to the meeting. Sherwin Williams will be responding to comments via their website at the address listed on your screen. Madam Chairwoman, the meeting is yours.
Good morning. We are here today for the concept review presentation, Sherwin Williams Company, Corporate Headquarters, New Construction. This is case number DF 2021-016. In advance of beginning, I need to swear in anyone in the audience who will be speaking on the matter. That would be anyone from the design team, construction team, anybody. Could you please stand and raise your right hand? Good morning. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth for this matter now in hearing under the penalty of perjury? Thank you. We will now begin the presentation.
Okay. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Tim Muckley, and I'm the Director of Corporate Real Estate for the Sherwin-Williams Company. With me today is Julie Young, who's our Vice President of Communications. We also have Bill Chilton, who is a principal of the architectural firm Picard Chilton. We've got Matt Heisey, who's a principal at the architectural firm of Vocon, and John Zegan with Osborne Engineering. What we're going to cover today, but what we're really focused on is presenting to you the how, the why, the where, and the what. My focus will be on the how and the why, then I'll turn it over to Matt and Bill to talk about the where and the what. I first want to start by just explaining a little bit of Sherwin's approach to this project. Sherwin wants this project to be successful. Sherwin needs this project to be successful. This is our future. This project means a lot to our organization. We believe that the key to that success is developing a strong partnership with the city. We know that a strong partnership, the foundation for a strong partnership, like any relationship, is developing trust. We know that trust is not earned, or trust is earned, it's not given. And in order to earn trust, we need to exhibit three qualities. And those qualities are being dependable, being credible, and showing integrity. So what does that mean in this context? Dependability is easy. Will I do what I say that I'm going to do? Can you rely on me to keep my promises? Credibility. Do I know what the heck I'm doing? Or have I at least surrounded myself with good people who know what they're doing? I'll be honest, this is the first 36-story high-rise building that I've ever built. But it's not the first, for Matt and Bill and other people who are on our team. And then lastly, integrity. Will I do the right thing? Are my actions motivated by our own self-interest or for the betterment of the common goals of the partnership? But it's from this framework that, in mindset, that we look and approach this project. Build trust, develop a strong partnership, and make this incredibly successful for Sherwin and the city of Cleveland. With that said, we know that there's going to be times where the city's vision for urban development and Sherwin's business needs may not be in alignment. When that happens, I can commit to do three things. First, be honest about what we can and can't do. Second, listen and understand the city's perspective. And third, engage our resources to try to find an acceptable resolution. We've got an incredibly talented team, and if there's a win-win solution out there, they're going to find it. So in a nutshell, that kind of describes the how. I want to give you a little bit of history on the project background to try to explain the why. Sherwin has been in the landmark office tower since 1930 when it was constructed. We started out as a small tenant. Today we own the building and we occupy over 1 million square foot. We've experienced in the last 10 to 15 years tremendous growth, which has been good for everybody except for the person who has to find a place for all those people to sit, which is me. So that's caused us
Hey, Tim,
to...
sorry to interrupt. Could you speak just a little more into the microphone? I'm getting word that it's not picking up as well online.
Okay, all right.
Thanks.
So we've had to expand our operations to the Skyline Office Tower. We've had to move some operations to a back office building or back office support in Hinckley Industrial Parkway. And we've actually had to move some of our headquarters people to Warrensville, our R&D center, just because we're out of space. I mean, today we've outgrown our building. We also have some significant deficiencies in our building. We've got antiquated mechanical systems. We've got challenging floor plates. We've got low ceilings. We've got elevators that kind of have a mind of their own sometimes. So, we've always prided ourselves on being a company that is innovative, collaborative, and creative. And our current work environment, our current building does not support a work environment that's consistent with those principles. So based on the need for more space and to find a more modern work environment, in 2019, we started a nationwide search to try to find a new home for our headquarters. We considered other options, we considered other states, but ultimately we chose Cleveland. And we just didn't choose anywhere in Cleveland, we chose downtown. And we just didn't choose anywhere in downtown, we chose Public Square, the epicenter of the city. While other companies were leaving the CBD and fleeing to the suburbs, we did just the opposite. We took our flag and put it right in the middle of the city. Why? Because we wanted to show our commitment to the city where it all started for Sherwin-Williams in 1866 along the bank of the Cuyahoga River. And we wanted to show our belief in the people of Northeast Ohio. If it wasn't for the city's support and the talented people of this area for the last 155 years, we wouldn't be the Fortune 200 company that we are today. Now we've assembled a team of world-class builders and designers. We're ready to get started. We're ready to fill in the missing puzzle piece that's eluded downtown for so long. And we're ready to do something transformational. Transformational for our employees, for our organization, and for the city of Cleveland. So before I turn it over to Matt and Bill, I did want to give a little bit of context behind our design. And start by, when we started this project, our first thing we did is we created a mission statement and had strategic filters. And I kind of wanted to talk about how those, take a few of those and explain how those translated into design elements. The first one was we wanted to create a world-class workplace that ignites innovation and productivity. We believe that the key to innovation and productivity is getting our employees to connect and collaborate. So one of the design elements that we did is we put everything in one high-rise tower. Instead of spreading it out over, we We've got 7 acres instead of spreading it out as a campus. We've really wanting to make people just one elevator ride away from each other. Today, in Landmark, which is actually made up of 3 separate buildings that are all kind of pulled together, we've got 3 separate sets of high-rise elevators, 3 sets of low-rise elevators. We've got floors that don't connect. Getting our people to connect and collaborate in our current environment is very difficult. We've also reserved an area, you'll see over here, for expansion, for creating a future tower. Today we've got people, as I mentioned, we got people spread out all over. We want to make sure that we can continue to stay in this location, and we anticipate this is going to be our home for the next 155 years. Number 2, we want to attract and retain the best talent. Sherwin-Williams is a global company. We're in over 130 different countries. We need to be able to attract a talent globally. But we also want to retain the local talent that's already here. We want to stop the Northeast Ohio brain drain, and we want to keep those people here. We've got great universities, we've got talented people in Northeast Ohio, and we got to figure out how to keep them here. So how do we do that? We create a great workplace experience. Provide a place that is secure and convenient. We provide a place that has great amenities, both in the building and around the building. So you'll see from as we walk through the design, we've pulled our parking garage off of West 6th and off of Sinclair. And the idea behind that is we want to create, we're going to have great amenities in our building. We're going to have a fitness center. We're going to have a wellness center. We're going to have a cafeteria, a barista. However, though, we also want to have great amenities around our building. So our thought would be is that we eventually have future development that would maybe be very similar to what's on the other side of the street. Place where you could have retail, you could have restaurants, you could have a boutique hotel. It would be a place where our employees could shop at noontime or grab a beer after work with a colleague. So the other thing that we've looked at is also wanting to provide on-site, affordable, secure parking. It's really still one of the biggest complaints that we hear from our interview candidates is really the cost and the convenience of parking. We currently have 250 spots in our at Landmark, and there's a 10-year wait list to get into that garage. Third, we want to celebrate our brand. When you go by our building today, you don't even hardly know that Sherwin-Williams headquarters is there. That's not what's going to be happening in the future. We want our building to be a beacon of success, both for Sherwin-Williams and the city of Cleveland. We also want this project to be catalytic, and I think that you're already starting to see that. You've got the proposed renovation of 55 Public Square. You've got the demolition and the redevelopment of the Rockefeller Garage, and you've got the proposed Magellan development just north of our site. You hear the saying that the rising tide lifts all ships. The further the success of Cleveland, it just furthers the success of Sherwin-Williams. And then lastly, we want to engage people and drive culture. We believe that you can't develop culture working remotely. Our CEO, John Marique, has probably said it the best. You can survive but not thrive with a remote workforce. So we're looking at this, and we're not going to reduce our footprint. We're still going to provide one-for-one seating for our employees. While other companies are finding ways to push people out of their headquarters, we're finding ways to bring them here. We're going to develop an R&D center at our headquarters that will bring people from all around the world. We have 60,000 employees globally. We train thousands of those every year. 90% of them are not headquarters employees. We're currently doing that training in hotel conference rooms, across the country. With this new L&D center, we're going to be bringing them right here to Cleveland. And really the reason is why is because we want them to learn our history and experience our culture. From a design perspective, what we've done is we've created a building that we call the Pavilion, and we've pulled some of the program elements out of the pavilion, or out of the tower, and we put them in the pavilion. And those two elements are our Center of Excellence, which tells the history of Sherwin-Williams, and our Learning and Development Center. We would consider that the cultural hub of our organization. So what better way to engage people and drive culture than to take your cultural hub, put it right on, have it speak right to public square, and engage the community. You also see that we've connected the tower and the pavilion with a sky bridge. I understand that sky bridges are not favored, and that I also understand that the urban planning principles of maintaining the pedestrian streetscape. However, this is critical to our organization. It's critical that those two buildings function as one organism. It's critical that our primary workplace is connected to our cultural hub. And it's important that our visiting employees can easily interact and collaborate with our leadership. So that is to give a little bit of context behind how we came up with some of our designs. At this point, I'll turn it over to Matt and Bill. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Just quickly to recap and go through some of the metrics. Tim started to touch on it a few seconds ago. The project is broken down into three components. The pavilion, which is effectively the front door of the organization, is approximately 50,000 square feet, 2 stories in height, and the programmatic functions that are in it, as Tim mentioned, will be the Learning and Development Center, will be the main proper entry to the building. There will be a barista. The Center of Excellence is the corporate lineage and the history of the organization, and there will be a merchandise store. The headquarters component is a 36-story tower. It will accommodate approximately 3,000 employees at just over 1 million square feet. And then lastly, the parking garage is approximately 920 spaces. It's important to note that Sherwin-Williams made a conscious decision to not develop parking for all 3,000 of their employees. So about 1/3 of their workforce will be able to be accommodated in the garage, but that was done because we know employees come from different places. Employees live downtown, employees use mass transit, and the 920 car parking garage will handle that. Also, there will be street-level retail on the liner facing West 3rd Street. That square footage is approximately 2,500 square feet.
Good morning. Good morning. Just to recap here, relative to the path going forward, we will be coming back with schematic design on August 31st and making that submission for September 14th review. And then the final submission will be on November 16th with a review on November 30th. We did a project in Oklahoma City a number of years ago, and it's interesting the parallels between that project and this project, not just for the company, but for the city. In 2007, Oklahoma City was in the middle of a major renaissance, a big change from where they were in the 1990s and where they were going up until today. And what's interesting in that journey is the amount of impact that it had on the city. And the impact that it had is something that was let me just go back here. The impact that it had was significant because it transformed the city. It was the catalyst for growth in downtown Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City went from having some real challenges in the 1990s to last year being one of 50 destinations in Travel Leisure magazine. So how did that happen? Why did that happen? So what I'd like to do is just go through quickly 3 projects that we've worked on in the last 10, 12 years. Devon Energy, the project I was just referring to, again in downtown Oklahoma City. And while we can talk about the architecture, to the city, one of the amazing things that happened was the amount of economic impact and development that happened as a result of the project. Downtown Oklahoma City, 2012. Here, in these yellow dots here, you can see those are projects that followed on Devon Energy's commitment to downtown Oklahoma City. Devon had an opportunity to go anywhere in the country. In fact, they looked at Houston, but they decided to stay in the city where they were founded. And by doing that, not only was the investment relative to private development, but in downtown development, the redevelopment of 8 miles of streets in downtown, in the downtown area. Milwaukee, Northwestern Mutual made a commitment to expand their campus in downtown Milwaukee. It's the same story in terms of literally billions of dollars of investment that have happened just in the last 4 years. And then finally, Dominion Energy, a project we finished about 1.5 years ago. Again, taking a site that was needed redevelopment, Dominion said, you know what, we're staying, not only in Richmond, we're staying in downtown. And again, just in the last few years, this amount of development. So how does that happen? Well, I'll tell you where it starts. It starts with leadership. And it starts with leadership between the public sector and the private sector. In each of these projects, and Sherwin-Williams is no different, there's a vision by the CEO about not only planting a firm flag in the downtown, but working in partnership with the public sector to make these projects happen. But there are other reasons as well. There is a commitment to the city. There is an engagement with the city. There are conversations like we're having right now that have a tremendous impact on ultimately what gets developed over time. This project represents an amazing opportunity, not just for Sherwin-Williams, but for the city of Cleveland. So to give you a little bit of context relative to the site, Matt's just going to walk you through the site, its relationship to the city, and some major components.
I'll go quick here. Aerial view from the southeast orients the 3 project sites that, for purposes of this presentation, we're still referring to as the Jacob site and the Weston site, Weston North, Weston South. Its orientation on Public Square, the surrounding buildings around it, Key Tower, Terminal Tower, 200 Public Square. A shot from the southeast again, the orientation of the Jacob site, which again will be the front door and the pavilion. The Weston sites to the north as we bridge into the warehouse district. A shot from the warehouse district looking back on the site as well. From an existing conditions perspective, from site parking curb cuts, there are approximately just under 1,000 spaces on the site right now, approximately 11 curb cuts. And those 1,000 spaces span the Jacob site and the 2 Weston sites, Weston North, Weston South. Contextual photos around the site, you can see obviously images of the Renaissance, 55 Public Square, St. Clair, West 6th Street, and Frankfurt. From a zoning perspective, the site sits in 2 different use districts. The Jacob site is what is in the downtown design review and city planning district. The Weston sites are in the landmarks districts. From a zoning perspective, we think that we know that we're approved on height, we're approved on use. The only zoning variance that we think we have, and right now I'll say think, we're not far enough down the path, is in the Urban Core Overlay District on the Weston sites. The Urban Core Overlay District requires buildings to be built within 3 feet of the property line. With the tower and the caissons, the size of the 8-foot caissons that need to go into the ground, we're working through the logistics and all of the utilities that are in West 3rd Street to determine if we can push that building face up to the property line. If we were unable to do that, the sidewalk would be streetscaped as if it were a sidewalk. I don't know that anybody would know that we weren't exactly on the property line, but technically we may not be within 3 feet of that. When we come back in August, we will have clarification to that and we'll know whether we need that variance or not. Parking and transit, this slide shows all of the existing parking lots in downtown, where Sherwin-Williams employees currently park, where they come from, where mass transit bus stops are. Essentially, we have folks that are coming to this building from all sides. Employees come from the west, employees come from the east, from the north and down 3rd Street. We have employees that come from the south and the east, as well as the residents that live downtown. So essentially, employees and visitors are approaching this site from all sides.
So, you know the site well. And if you look at the site in terms of the 3 contiguous blocks, it's pretty unique. It's pretty unique in any city in the United States. The fact that this site is fronting public square, I would argue it's the most important site in Cleveland. I would say it's one of the most important urban sites in the United States. Public Square, originally 1796, was 4 quadrants, and it was the center of the city. And then in 1903, with the mall and the vision for the mall, sort of the shift of the center of the city went a bit towards the mall. But with the construction of Terminal Tower and the Higbee's building in the 1930s, that shift came back to Public Square. And where we're sitting today is we're sitting in this very unique relationship, not only between the project and Public Square, but if we look at it in terms of the city. There's an interesting scene, is a word that I use to sort of describe what is happening at 3rd Street, because this is where there's a shift in scale from downtown, these major towers, and then the shift to scale to the warehouse district. And this is a really, really important shift. And as we debated the location of the various components to the project, meaning the tower, the pavilion, the parking garage, and we looked at a range of options, the decision was made to locate the pavilion here on the Jacob site. There are some very practical reasons. The floor plate that Sherwin-Williams needs to be able to function most efficiently would be really too big on that site. But there are also very important reasons relative to how Sherwin-Williams views this site relative to Public Square. You know, you could say that this is the front door for Sherwin-Williams, the pavilion itself, but the pavilion really can act as the front porch to Public Square and the power of that relationship. There's another reason that in terms of locating the tower on the Weston site, let me just pick this up here. If we located it, if we could, from a practical standpoint, locate on the Jacob site, you can start to see I would say in particular sort of the tension between 50 Public Square and Terminal Tower. And by pulling it back like we have, it gives that relief. And importantly, we looked at views from around the city of the downtown skyline. And arguably, Terminal Tower is the most significant tower in downtown Cleveland. And what happens is, in terms of the views, it starts actually, if the tower is located on the Jacob site, to compromise some of those views of Terminal Tower. So this allows Terminal Tower to breathe, if you will, visually. So we feel very, very good about that. There are 2 major site forces, I would say, that we are responding to in the design. One is obviously the relationship to Public Square, but also the relationship to the warehouse district. And again, as I was saying earlier, that change in scale. The concept design here it's already been pointed out in terms of the various components. But let me just touch on the future expansion piece of this, because it's important. What's located here west on what we call the southwestern site is future expansion for Sherwin-Williams. Timing of that, unknown, but it's important to be able to have that area for growth. And then with the parking garage located on the northwestern site, there is planned future development on the north and on the west. This could be commercial and retail. This could be residential or retail to the north. The first phase is, until that future expansion happens and this future development, would be surface parking, landscaped parking lots. And this would function, particularly on the southwestern side, as primarily a visitor lot for Sherwin-Williams. Here you can see the relationship of sort of the ingress and egress from the parking garages. And here, this is a one-way flow on Frankfurt into the garage entry with all cars exiting on 3rd. As we go through and look at the overall massing in this axonometric, this is showing the future development in terms of the future office tower and the development to the north and west of the parking garage. Again, this would be the first phase. This is what would be under construction by the end of this year. The organization of the pavilion and the tower is, and we'll get into a little more detail of this in a minute, but this functions, the pavilion itself and the tower really function as sort of one organism, if you will. We understand the concern with regard to sky bridges, and we do have two. We have one across 3rd and one here across Frankfurt connecting the parking garage to the tower. Now, why do we need that sky bridge on 3rd? Well, as I said, this is, in some ways, this is a vertical campus, given the fact it's an urban site. But that sky bridge functions, I would say, first and foremost, as a way of connecting the Sherwin-Williams family together. If Sherwin-Williams had made the decision to put everything on one site, so all the functions, learning and development, and the Center of Excellence at the base of the tower, you would have that same sort of functioning within the tower. What's happening here is we're pulling the Learning and Development Center of Excellence out on the Jacob site, and we have more of a horizontal flow than a vertical flow. There's also a couple of very practical reasons for the sky bridge. The first is this is quite food service intensive on the Jacob site, and kitchens and dining are in the tower. And so just to be able to service that. Secondly, utilities going from the tower to the pavilion are actually within that sky bridge. But I'll come back to this is really functioning for Sherwin-Williams to be able to have a highly functioning facility. It's also important to note that the sky bridge is private. It's not something that would be publicly accessible. So in terms of it's really functioning in terms of people working within the building itself would be using the sky bridge. Relative to building heights within the city, we're at about 616 feet tall, and that would make it the 4th tallest building in Cleveland. I'd just like to touch on quickly as we are in schematic design right now. So what are some of the things that we're concerned about? And I just wanted to highlight 3 projects to talk about not only the relationship in the city, but what is happening at the ground plane. For instance, how do we integrate art within the overall project? This is a project in Chicago, River Point. Again, there's the same sort of issues in terms of what we're concerned about relative to the ground plane, art, presence in the city is relevant to that project. And then finally, also in Chicago, 300 North LaSalle, in both cases, projects which touch the river, and how do we engage the environment around us. So what we wanted to do today is to give you a sense of where things are going from a schematic design standpoint. We appreciate this is for conceptual review and approval, but we thought it would be good to give you a real-time view as to where we're at. In fact, what I'll be reviewing with you, portions of this were just reviewed with Sherwin-Williams last Thursday. So let me just sort of, put these pieces in place. So here we have, this is the parking garage here and the future development. This is the pavilion. And what you see here is a sky bridge connection. And I'll talk in a minute here about why the pavilion is shaped and organized the way it is. This is the future expansion for Sherwin-Williams, which would be on the west end of the site. Actually, let me pull this. And this represents the concept design. Oops. Represents the concept design for the tower. So let me walk through with you what has shaped what you're seeing there in the model. Views from the tower. This site is, I would say, particularly blessed with fabulous views in every direction. Whether it's to Lake Erie, whether it's to Public Square, to the warehouse district, to the flats, there's literally no bad view from the tower. And if you look at the relationship of the tower to the city, here is looking from the Memorial Shoreway, and you get a sense of what the presence is of the tower. And also, I mean, this is just one particular view, but again, sort of the deference that's being shown to Terminal Tower and to Key Tower. When we start looking at the overall building massing, I'll just use Key Tower here. We think about towers in terms of, and when I say we, I'd say architects. This has been around for a very long time. But a base and a middle and the top. If you look at the top of the tower here, it's a landmark. It's an architectural lighting opportunity. In the middle here, which is sort of the guts of the tower itself, it's articulated to avoid a monolithic appearance. It's slender vertical proportions. And historically, oftentimes they were stepped back to increase light, thank you, and air at street level, and then the base. In the interest of time, we've got about 5 minutes, so I'll go through the rest of this quickly. Relative to the tower, the aspect ratio, or the relationship of height to width. If you look at Key Tower, it's a little under 7:1. Terminal Tower is 7:1. We have a much larger floor plate that we're working with here. And so how do we start to shape and sculpt the tower to, in this case, sort of break down the relationship to have a more sort of visually slender tower? Let me just real quickly, relative to the lobbies, we have the pavilion lobby here and the tower lobby here. And again, there's a connection relative to the sky bridge, and then this is the parking lobby. And at the second level, you can see the sky bridge connection that brings all of this together. So I mentioned about aspect ratio. Right now, this block that you see here, that is 3:1. What we've done relative to the tower itself, is we've created this slot here, which breaks down the aspect ratio actually into two pieces. A portion of it is at 7:1, the other is at 5:1. So as we started to shape this tower, we looked at the aspect ratio, as I was just mentioning. We then started to say, what about if we started to, we're along that demarcation where that slot is, actually sort of pull the tower apart, particularly vertically, to accentuate that articulation. And then as we started to look at the crown, how do we shape this in such a way that it starts to have, I would say, more of a sort of a logic to it. So for instance, here, the tallest portion here is fronting Public Square. This is also, the view to the south. This sort of proportional relationship is what you would see. There's a datum that exists in Public Square, and you can see it. It's not a precise elevation, but there is this datum. Where there's a break in terms of the lower mass and the higher mass. We have a much different building here with large floor plates, but what we've done here is we started to sculpt this, creating these terraces, which are recognizing these fabulous views in all four directions, but also echoing that datum. And so this is how it comes together. So that's the terraces I was just talking about, obviously the pavilion, and then the tower top. Matt?
Yeah, we can be brief about just in the interest of time, the way that the internal functions work together. Bill mentioned, our main lobbies off of Public Square, the main connector, the connective tissue of the organization as one organism on the ground level. Barista, main entry, merchandise store, center of excellence on the north half. Secondary lobby on the tower. And then on the second level, connecting through the line of security, connecting the pavilion to the tower across the pedestrian bridge. Food service, as Bill mentioned, will be on the second level of the podium, allowing that function and the servability of food to the learning and development functions on the second level. The south portion of the second level of the pavilion is also learning and development as well. So essentially, the entire second level of the pavilion is learning and development. The first level of the pavilion is more open space. Barista, center of excellence, the welcoming front door of the organization, all connected through the sky bridge as the one organism, as Bill has mentioned, back and forth to the tower above.
And then this is an image on the skyline. I guess I could close with a quick comment, and that is, a number of years ago, there was an article written in the New York Times, and it was entitled "For Great Buildings Get a Great Client." And the thrust of the article was how some very important ideas of landmark buildings were actually ideas of the client. And this project is no different. In that, if you look at the location, how the siting of the pavilion, the siting of the tower, being respectful of the context, these are all out of conversations that we've had with Sherwin-Williams. Of course, the most important decision that they made was to be in Cleveland, downtown, on Public Square. When we were working in the early stages of the project, CEO John Maricas made a comment about his vision for the project, and he said, "Bring to life who we are." And I think those are great words, certainly to speak about Sherwin-Williams and this project, but about the city of Cleveland as well. Thank you.
Thank you. For the edification of our listening audience, I'm going to lay out how we're going to deliberate, and we're going to move into deliberations at this time. We will be taking a short 10-minute recess to transition to our design review committees. Our design review committees will be deliberating with Sherwin-Williams for 60 minutes. We will then take another recess and have our commissions deliberate with Sherwin-Williams for 60 minutes. So we will have an opportunity for a very robust exchange. So at this time, we're going to go to a brief recess, and we will be returning shortly. Thank you. Testing. Thank you. We're going to now start the first deliberation in this meeting. And we are starting today with our design review advisory committees, chaired by Mr. Jack Bialowski. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Bialowski, who's going to lead the meeting for the next 60 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming back. We're going to conduct this a little bit differently because it's a larger group where we usually have a free-flowing conversation. Because we have both committees together, we're going to be a little more formal. So if you raise your hand to be recognized, and Tom Sterinsky, my colleague, is going to give us the order in which people will be able to speak here and ask their questions. But first, just a couple of comments. First of all, thank you so much for that presentation this morning. It's really enlightening. Appreciated being able to see the look ahead, which explains a lot of the questions that I'm sure that people have. Over the course of the last period of time, from the public comments, the city's received in Sherwin-Williams, and I know that you are responding to them, over 40 written comments from the public, which is really quite remarkable. And they are, almost all of them, very serious and well considered. First of all, expressing gratitude to Sherwin-Williams for all that they've done for the community over the years and for wanting to keep their flag planted here downtown and at Public Square. So that decision is really fabulous. There's much recognition of a hometown favorite, and we are all rooting for its great success. So having said that, the largest concerns which were raised through these comments related to the tower location and the perceived completion of Public Square, the aversion to sky bridges, which was mentioned in almost half of all of the comments, a strong desire for street vitality and activity on the street as opposed to large swaths of blank walls at street level, whether for parking garages or office uses. This applies to the entire ground floor, but especially to Frankfurt. And concern over the implication of vacating Frankfurt, a recognition that it is one of the strongest connections from Public Square to the warehouse district. And if it is vacated, an easement or other form of guarantee is needed to ensure that this connection is preserved. These really were the main comments that came out of those comments, and I'm sure they echo many of the thoughts of both of these groups. So having said that, I'm going to open the...
So, point of order, Mr. Chair. Before we begin, we do need to take the roll call
Oh, thank
of all
you,
those
Anthony.
present for the
Please.
committees. So you may answer here or present when I call your name. Bialowski,
Present.
Benton, Bogart, Boyd, Brown, Geist, Long, O'Connell,
Here.
Parker,
Present.
Pizarczyk,
Present.
Schwartzberg, Soltis, Vanderweel, Yablonsky, Zarfos, and Zarnas. Mr. Chair, we do have a quorum, and just a note, Ms. Vanderweel and Ms. Schwartzberg did have to recuse themselves from being present today due to a conflict of interest.
Very good. Anthony, is there any other points of order that need to be mentioned before we open the discussion up?
Nope, we are good.
Very good. Okay. So,
Mr. Brylowski, the TV's hard to pick up the voice, so when you make sure your green light is on and make sure you speak into your microphone so everybody can hear.
thank you, Tom. So I'm going to open up the panel for questions. Well, I'll start with a few myself. How many employees, I think you said that there are 60,000 globally, and 90% of those are not here. Does that mean that there are, how many employees expected to be downtown?
Well,
Approximately 3,100.
3,100 employees, thank you. Okay. How tall is the lower pavilion anticipated to be? I know it's 2 stories, but what is its height, and how does that compare to the datum lines around Public Square, say, for example, for the Renaissance or other pieces? Yeah.
I want to say roughly, probably to the top, nominally 50 feet. The datum, relationship of the datum is, actually, let me use this model, is relative to the terrace here. So when we talk about that relationship of the datum, this is what we're...
Okay, so the pavilion is significantly
Lower,
than...
that's right.
Okay. How big is the floor plate of the tower?
Floor plates of the tower are approximately 28,500 square feet at the moment.
28,500 square feet. Okay, and for those people who may not know, 25,000 is probably the smallest sized tower block that would be an efficient office space. So it's not overly large, but it is certainly, in order to make a tower work and be efficient, it's right at that lower edge of what it would be able to be.
Said, I would say for the towers that we're involved with being, I would say, between 26 to 29,000 gross square feet is, it's sort of in the sweet spot.
Very good. What is the first floor height of the parking garage? Yes. And the reason I'm asking is relative to the potential for there to be other uses on that first floor in that block, whether it's retail or something else, garage height would not be adequate for that.
Right, I think on the first floor, don't hold me to this, but I want to say it's around 11 feet.
I'm sorry?
Don't hold me to this, but I think it's around 11 feet. on
11
the
feet.
First floor, floor to floor.
Okay, so not really high enough if we convince you to put other uses in the bottom of that garage. Are you anticipating a mid-block crossing at grade underneath the sky bridge? No. So as the public flows through that pavilion, or if it does, and I imagine there is a public function on the ground floor of that pavilion because there's a merchandise, am I correct, that the public is welcome in the ground floor of the pavilion? So, but they are not likely to be going into the tower as well unless they were conducting business, so there's no reason for that mid-block crossing at grade level.
The sky bridge is essentially on the secure side of security. So theoretically, anybody that's crossing the sky bridge would be in the tower for business functions.
Okay.
Can I just clarify on I think you were asking if there's public access to the pavilion. And our intention is, we're looking at all the options. When we talk about the barista and the retail store, it is likely that it will be open to the public, but no final decision.
It's not determined yet.
That is not determined.
Okay. What happens to the landmark tower when you exit it?
Yeah, we've we've got plans, and we'll try to sell that, just with, same thing with our Marine Technical Center down on the river, same thing with Lawrenceville. And obviously, we're looking for, want to see it, quickly, redeveloped, and some of the things that make it not sometimes such a great office building would make it an excellent building for potentially, condominiums or apartments.
So potentially conversion to residential.
I think that would be very likely.
Very good. So have you done a traffic study? Does one exist? There is a lot of discussion about how Frankfurt will be perceived and used. And there's also a feeling, I think, certainly in conversations that have happened here, that the city really needs to be a partner with Sherwin-Williams in terms of working on issues around traffic flow. If you have 3,000 employees here and you have almost 1,000 cars which are going to be entering and exiting this block, it's really going to be important to understand those traffic impacts and issues around service on Frankfurt. So can you address that? How many trucks a day are coming? Why do you want to change the direction of flow? And talk to us about egress and ingress into the parking garage.
There's a lot of questions in there, so I'll try to take them kind of one at a time. So our vision for Frankfurt would be that, once it's vacated, we probably would block it off at the West 3rd Street side. And when I mean block it off to vehicular traffic. But obviously, we're going to keep that. I mean, we acknowledge and realize that, that is one of the primary connectors from Public Square to the warehouse district. So that would stay open for pedestrian traffic. But what our idea is that we would, not have through traffic. Is kind of is what our thinking is at this point. And we also know that, a large percentage of our employees are coming from the north. I'm sorry, from the south. And we'll funnel through a lot of the way they do today, coming up Ontario Street, and that group will be coming through here, and we envision them coming down West 6th, turning on to vacated Frankfurt, and then our busiest time is in the morning, and so the thought would be is that if there's any stacking that occurs, it occurs on Frankfurt, and we make sure we keep all the vehicular traffic off the road. Same thing with deliveries. Deliveries would come in back into the loading dock, and then be able to exit back out onto.
How often? How many deliveries a day are you receiving?
I don't know. We receive most of them in the morning. Today they unload off of Huron. I could probably get that for you. I don't know.
I think that we do need to know that, and I appreciate that you understand where your employees are coming from and when they're coming. I don't know if they're all released at the same time onto the city streets, but I think it's really important that a traffic engineer study this and in conjunction with the city come back with a report that says that these streets are not going to be in failure based on the plan that you have. And I don't know whether have you started to do that yet? Do you have a traffic engineer engaged?
Yes. So we just recently engaged Nelson Nygaard, which will be be our traffic consultant. Some of the reason why we didn't do one earlier is with COVID, there was just if we would have done one, we don't think the data would have been accurate. I think now that people are coming back, I think traffic patterns are probably getting back closer to normal. So
that's a very understandable reason. I appreciate that very much.
So we acknowledge that that's something that we need to do. I think I addressed all of them.
Most of them, but let's just keep going for a minute because I think.
One point of clarification on the traffic study. Some conversations we've had internally with Director Collier and Mr. Barlowski is that the traffic study really shouldn't always be a burden of just Sherwin-Williams, because there's a lot of things happening here and there's a lot of wants and needs in the district. So I believe it's a partnership and a collaboration of the city, the Warehouse District, Downtown Cleveland Alliance, Greater Cleveland Partnership, NOACA, and RTA in the same conversation to make sure your needs are met, but also everything else. So I think I just want to be incumbent. And if you don't have anything else, Mr. Parker.
I'm not quite ready yet. Thank you, Mr. Sterinsky. Relative to the future expansion tower, we understand that parking needs are changing over time, ride sharing, automated vehicles, public transportation. But you're showing a fairly massive addition at some point. And the question is, do you have any idea when that might be projected? And also, how would you park it at such time? You know, how would you expand parking on site?
I think our intention would not be to do any further on-site expansion of our parking. So we roughly have 3,100 people. This garage will have 900 and some spaces. So I think that's adequate. I mean, today we've got 250 parking spaces in our building. So it's going to be a dramatic increase from what we have today. I wouldn't envision us adding to that parking garage. As far as the future tower, I really don't have a timeline on that. It was more just, we've made this mistake in manufacturing plants and DSCs that we have throughout the country of not planning for the future and not thinking about what our growth is going to be. I would have never guessed 10 years ago that we would be where we're at today. And I want to make sure that, one of my goals was to do smart master planning and making sure that this remains the site that Sherwin can stay for years to come.
Tim, I appreciate your answers. I don't agree that you won't need to provide additional parking at some point. And the reason that I'm asking that is that there has been discussion about the low density of the parking garage, that it has a very big floor plate. It's not very tall. And that if you were to add additional floors to it, that this would preserve land at the bottom, both for potential expansion of a garage, which is much easier to do horizontally than it is vertically, and also for other potential uses. There's been a lot of discussion about the lack of active uses on the street level on Frankfurt, the de minimis portion of it that is actually on West 3rd. And so that's something that I think needs to be considered further. And I should say that I personally believe that the planning, the site planning that's gone on, the place where these pieces are apportioned, I respect and agree with, that the land which has been left on the northwestern block is appropriate size that is going to make for successful development there. But can you also talk about that development, when you think that would happen, and whether Sherwin-Williams is prepared to partner with others if that's needed to make those developments viable?
Absolutely. And some of our thought is by keeping the parking garage at a lower level, that as you develop the potential retail, or even if it's residential units along Sinclair, that you really wouldn't even see the parking garage. I mean, that was kind of what our thought process was. We made sure this was appropriate sized, that we accommodate most of your typical retail bays or even potential hotel user. And same thing along Sinclair. I think we dropped in some brownstones or something along there just to make sure that those are the things that actually would fit, and that they would be at a height where you really wouldn't see the parking garage at all, really, from West 6 or from Sinclair.
And do you have thoughts about, in the meantime, how you would treat those facades?
That's what we're working through. Now, we understand. I mean, nobody wants to look at just the side of a concrete garage. So we understand that. We're working through that with the design team to figure out what that exactly looks like, and how potentially maybe we even use that to celebrate our color, our products potentially. So we're working through that. And just to go back, I think one other thing. I have talked initially to a few developers, and it's just, I mean, the time right now is really difficult when you start talking retail and restaurants. I think in the next year, you're going to see that improve dramatically. And it is just as much our intent and our desire to want to have those amenity pieces that I talked about. I mean, we bought more land than what we needed, and we knew that. But we wanted to make sure we knew what was going around us and how that supported our people.
Right.
Very good. Appreciate that answer. I'm going to recognize Director Collier now.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I wanted to say to Tim, thank you for the proposal for the tower, first and foremost, and also just getting a little glimpse of what your massing is. I want to say that the building looks to be dynamic and kind of moving in the right direction. But obviously, the tower is something that many people are excited about. But much of the conversation is really about the site itself and how it integrates into our downtown. And we know that this is a once-in-a-lifetime investment, so we want to make sure that we get this right. A couple things with respect to what was stated by Mr. Bialowski with respect to in the meantime. What people have to look at until those development happens matters. There's a couple of key examples here locally where that was done very well. University Hospitals is one of them, where they really were aggressive about the facades on the garage to make it attractive in order to create that sort of visual impact and hide the cars and do things of that nature. So there's a design solution for that, and I think we'd be willing to work closely with you to figure out what that interim situation is. With respect to the retail, we understand that obviously coming out of COVID-19, retail can be very challenging. However, we want to make sure that as we move forward in the future, that we have opportunities to be additive to the site, which I think that you've allowed space to do. One question that I do have is with respect to the employees who are working downtown. Obviously, from a city perspective, we want them living downtown and also spending money downtown. So with respect to those uses, I know that it was conceived to be a possibility of townhouses on the St. Clair side. But what about that West 6 side? I know there was some discussion around mixed-use possibilities, and I'm also wondering what smaller scale organizations or businesses are spinoffs or benefit from the products of Sherwin-Williams, companies that could potentially locate close by in a mixed-use scenario. So this is an organization that's obviously global, and its tentacles reach out globally, but they also have to reach out locally. So talk to me a little bit about the thinking about the mixed-use development and what flanks this site.
No, thank you. I mean, we kind of envision that, the West 6 side would look very similar to potentially what's across the street right now, where you've got restaurants, you've got some apartments and offices potentially above them, kind of in that same height and that same characteristic. Again, we'll have to, we're not a developer. We'll need to work with a developer to find that solution. Mm-hmm. But I can assure you that we're going to be a very active participant in that process. And, you're right. We have a lot of businesses that we work with. And, it would be an opportunity for us to look at some of those businesses and say, hey, why don't you locate here?
Right there, right.
You're right next door. Mm-hmm. So that will be the process that we'll be going through. And I think it's a great opportunity both to have that infill and also to support Sherwin-Williams.
Thank you, Tim. Just one more question before we go to Rick, which is for Matt, and that is, I know you've talk to us about a tunnel across West 3rd rather than Sky Bridge.
So obviously we talked about the connectivity of the organization, the organism. We did look at multiple scenarios. We know that there have been comments. We considered the idea of tunneling under West 3rd Street. The fact of the matter is there are major utilities in West 3rd Street that essentially make tunneling under West 3rd Street not possible. The logistics that go with it, the street closures, and the amount of utilities that are in West 3rd Street made tunneling under West 3rd Street not the best. As we talk about the employee experience and the experience of those living within the tower, it changes the employee experience as well. It changes the visitor experience. You know, my front door is coming to the pavilion as a visitor, first-time visitor to Sherwin-Williams. I walk into an amazing glassy pavilion, I get greeted in the right way, I go through security, and now I'm sent down an elevator to go through a tunnel to come back up into the tower. The alternative, the decision that we've decided to go with is the Sky Bridge. You know, a glassy, open, transparent connection from the second floor of learning development across to a dynamic two-story space on the other side as well.
Thank you, Matt. Mr. Parker?
Thank you. Rick Parker with a Historic Downtown Design Review. I'd like to take Jack's lens and turn it just slightly and look at it a little differently. Some of the concerns about, you talked a lot about we talked a lot about the traffic on Frankfurt and that. I've been a business owner and building owner in the warehouse district for nearly 40 years, over 40 years, so I'm very familiar with the district. Several of us have a very strong concern about the pedestrian experience, the community experience, the residents' experience, traversing from Public Square and west on Euclid Avenue and all those major thoroughfares. And you've acknowledged that Frankfurt is a significant connector into the district. Well, just responding to the information provided, you've acknowledged it verbally, but I don't see it in the design. You've got some retail liner on West 3rd. Nothing's proposed on Frankfurt, and I think that's what Jack was alluding to, the height of the garage structure. And also, and it's slightly outside the warehouse district, but the pavilion site, creating a wall, in this concept of creating a wall there that kind of barricades Frankfurt access from Public Square. So realizing that you don't need that whole site for the square footage for the program there, we've talked about, how can that connection on that particular site be more inviting and draw people to Frankfurt to get into the warehouse district. I don't know, I guess I'd like to hear your conversations on what conversations you've had with that respect specifically. You've acknowledged it, and there are certainly different ways to get into the warehouse district, but I mean, just logic and nature, and you just stand there and look at it, that's the connection. So what I'm hearing is a lot of justification, and you can work through the traffic, and we deal with that on Johnson Court. I mean, we've got a similar situation, and there are other issues down there, but I guess I'd like to hear more about your thought process or in that regard. The reality of people traversing up West 3rd North, going past a limited retail, which probably will fail because there's nothing around it. And then you've got a garage, an ugly garage across the street, and some other stuff going on that really doesn't lend itself to the pedestrian experience. So if you can talk about that, traffic we've addressed, some of the logistics and all that kind of stuff, good design and thinking will get through that. But I'm really concerned about the experience of the pedestrian and the people that live in the district and work in the district.
Thank you for your question. Regarding the traffic, one thing I think worth pointing out, and again, we're at a conceptual level. This is a perfect time, as Mr. Starinsky mentioned, to get the public involved in the traffic conversation and the connectivity. But one thing that we see generally in downtown, especially recently with the plan that I know the city's involved with to add pedestrian connectivity to the lakefront, which is, for a long-time Cleveland resident, something I thought I'd never see. The Frankfurt specifically, and one of the reasons we talked about blocking the end of the road and changing the traffic pattern there was because we see that as a pedestrian connection to the warehouse district. If you look at this, and I don't mean to speak for the architects, but if you look at this, we're also repairing the edge of the warehouse district at this parking lot. When we look from the warehouse district to downtown, there was something missing from the warehouse district perspective too. So by cutting off the auto traffic or reducing the auto traffic through Frankfurt, the thought process that we're beginning on as we start our traffic study is this is a pedestrian-oriented connection. And so, again, we're still starting the traffic study and really getting into the meat of it now, but the auto connection is there through the other corridors towards into and out of the warehouse district, but we really thought that the warehouse district deserved a pedestrian connection to the downtown area and public square.
Okay, can you talk a little bit about the pavilion site then? My question on that.
The pavilion site, again, I think I thought it was well presented by the architects here. The idea was to get down below that datum line and connect to public square. And by bring the project to public square and keeping the pathway through Frankfurt, we hope to strengthen that pedestrian connection between the two districts because they've always been separate, both architecturally and from a traffic perspective to a certain degree. I don't know if that answers your question completely.
The programming maybe that happens on the first floor, that may start to answer the question that's being asked. From a pedestrian experience, the programming that happens on the first floor of, let's talk about West 3rd Street to start, to address your initial question. As you come off of the corner of Superior and 3rd and you head north as a pedestrian, say you're coming from Public Square, you kind of meander through, the front door. The intention is working with we just onboarded our landscape architect, that the outside portion of the entry of the building is very dynamic. It's, what we've referred to as potentially the color garden. Something that changes seasonally, that showcases color, showcases brand, and essentially invites pedestrians from Public Square to this corner of the building. Walking then from West Roadway westbound on Superior to the corner of West 3rd and Superior, I now, as a pedestrian, turn north. And on the tower side, the main tower lobby is intended to transcend the entire expanse from Superior to Frankfurt. That's a 24-foot high, potentially glassy lobby, activity inside, people moving around. So that is a dynamic first floor experience from the outside. I continue up 3rd Street, I now encounter the parking garage, and this is where we have our retail liner. We're working on uses that might go into the retail liner. We're talking about uses that could use that retail liner based on the square footage that it is right now. And from that point, I am now into the warehouse district. On the pavilion side, what has not been said is, the first story programming consists of main lobby, barista merchandise store on the south half of this two-story connector, and then the Center of Excellence on the north side. So essentially, as I'm walking down that same route, I get glimpses into the inside of the building. I see the barista, I see the merchandise store. If I choose to go north, onto Frankfurt, I am coming past glassy looks into potentially the Center of Excellence. And so there's an engaging...
I think maybe give a little color to the Center of Excellence.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the Center of Excellence is a program component that exists at Sherwin-Williams today. It is essentially where visitors come today. If you are a visitor to the organization, you basically, pre-COVID, went to the Center of Excellence. It's a space where you're greeted. It's a space where you can understand the history of the organization. There's quotes from Henry Sherwin. There's initial patents. There's the brand displays. It's essentially the front branded entry to the front door. When you walk in now today, you walk in the building and you don't get that. You walk, to get to the Center of Excellence, you go up through Van Swiergen Arcade and you arrive there. The vision for the Center of Excellence here is you walk in the front door and you know immediately what this organization does. We celebrate color, we celebrate brand, we celebrate design. And so the Center of Excellence is that place that the outward story can be told. It's also a place where customers are invited in to learn about the organization as well. So in the initial planning...
One other comment, excuse me, is, this is all in development, but from the exterior, that if you're in Public Square or you're walking along here, you get a sense of who is Sherwin-Williams. I mean, it's a real opportunity to be able to see into this center of excellence. So relative to, Mr. Parker, your question about activity, certainly during, the daytime, this is going to be, along with, this southern portion, I would say, much more active.
But you imagine at nighttime as well.
Exactly.
I'm going
So
to,
I'd like to follow up, please. So you've addressed architecturally. I understand. I'm an architect. I understand all that. And certainly if Sherwin-Williams wants to put the best face forward, I appreciate that and support that completely. But I'm still looking at, I'm coming from Public Square, I'm hitting a wall there, and I have to make a decision for a 90-degree turn north to go down Frankfurt, or a 90-degree turn south, go down Superior, and then turn again 90 degrees to come back into the district. I'm not hearing anything that addresses how you're, if the thought is at all to draw people. Okay, so unless the building's open 24/7, which I know it's not going to be, and I can use that building as a hallway to get through to Frankfurt, I don't see it. I still don't see it. All right, so I see a narrow Frankfurt on Public Square right there. I don't see anything that invites you to come around that, other than, obviously all the great stuff for Sherwin-Williams. And I'm not knocking any of that. That's absolutely valid. But I'm looking at that experience for the people that live in here that come back and forth through Public Square to Euclid and all the other areas of downtown.
thank you, Rick. I'm going to recognize Mr. Sterinsky for a moment, then Mr. Collier, then Alan O'Connell, and then Mr. Yablonsky.
So just to, I think, clarify a little bit what Mr. Parker is saying, thinking, reinforcing the pedestrian aspect that you want to create on both Frankfurts all the way to 6th Street. Is there some siting that we could, that you could consider in terms of maybe moving the pavilion south a little bit to make that space between 55 Public Square and the pavilion more of a people place that pulls people all the way across? And then could we think about adjusting the footprint of the parking garage? And maybe you grow a couple stories, but then you create the opportunity to create liner buildings on Frankfurt where there's likely going to be people, because there's never going to be, for the foreseeable future, a two-sided street on that block of West 3rd Street. So to the point of Rick saying that retail won't survive there, there's not a reason to put retail there. So again, in the idea of this shouldn't all be incumbent on Sherwin-Williams, there's a collaboration opportunity to think about a retail strategy of all the buildings, including the ones that you're building currently, and think about where to put retail and adjust the footprint of the parking garage to accommodate that.
Tom, remember, there are going to be 3,000 people planted on this block, coming out onto the streets here. So that is an argument for retail actually succeeding both on West 3rd and on Frankfurt. And at a minimum, raising the floor height of the garage, first floor, to 19, 20 feet would allow you to be flexible as to how much you had, but you could increase it. Okay,
At the minimum, we're shrinking the footprint to get liner buildings to have that face of Frankfurt be a more human scale was where I was going.
Thank you. Director Collier.
Yes, thank you. Just a couple of key things. Given the fact that you're going to have thousands of employees on a given site, I'm really looking at sort of the travel habits of your employee base, because that's really what's going to dictate, what happens on the street, et cetera. Obviously, there's a bend toward the automobile, because I'm sure many of your employees, travel here by car. The question is, how do we change that? And my question is, have you guys had any conversations with RTA about transit waiting environments on the site, at the perimeter of the site? One, what that experience is. And given the fact that you're right next to Tower City Center, which is a transit hub that can get you to many different locations in the greater Cleveland area via rapid transit, or those who are coming from inside the city, by bus. So that RTA conversation and really trying to get people out of their vehicles, utilizing public transportation, what type of site conditions are you creating or thinking about creating to enhance that opportunity for your employees?
Yeah, let me speak to that because we just had a conversation with RTA yesterday, and we talked a little bit about, you know, from the work that we've been able to do as far as like looking at our Wage Works program, it appears that about 1/3 of our people do take some form of public transportation. I think now, again, that things have advanced past the pandemic, you know, we're going to take the opportunity to send out surveys to our employees to try to get a better idea of like, are they taking car? Are they taking, you know, the rapid? Are they using buses? But from what we can tell, it looks like about 1/3 of them are currently taking public transportation today.
Sure. And we would like for your organization, and you know, given Sherwin-Williams being a mainstay in the city, is to be partners in helping to change travel habits. You know, a lot of what is happening right now in the city, you know, with different organizations, is really incentivizing and promoting and encouraging their employee base to think differently about how they move around and how they get around. So we would like to be partners with you in really helping to support your employees in really making positive environmental impacts by changing the culture as to how they move about. That's really important, I think, for the city of Cleveland.
So as part of when we were like looking at our site selection process, we did a heat map of, we took every employee address and we plugged it in to a program where it tells you exactly, it puts a dot on a map and tells you exactly where they live at. Talked to Mr. Shipner yesterday, and you know, we're going to try to look at sharing that with RTA, so that way they can kind of say, okay, this is where most of Sherwin's employees are. You know, do we have bus routes to those locations? And maybe we can work together to try to make sure that if we have a lot of people in an area that's underserved, that we can, you know, try to work with them to get, you know, get buses to those locations.
Thank you, Tim. It seems that we need to keep moving, but clearly convening a meeting with RTA, the city, and others relative to those issues is an important thing to do. I'm going to recognize Mr. O'Connell.
Hello. So I think given your initial presentation, and what we all understand is we understand that the property that's located just adjacent to public squares is very important to the city. It's therefore, you know, I think we should give the most emphasis to having good design there, and we won't get another shot at it in our lifetimes to make sure that we do it right. So, you know, I think it's important to promote spatial order of significance in an orientation that concentrates intensity of building form and use around this focal point, which we agree to be the consensus center of our city. This is the heart of our city, and we should be recognizing the importance of that spatial order which already surrounds public square by accentuating the moment where the site meets public square. Do we all agree on that as design professionals? Okay, so if we all agree that public square is important, we won't get another shot, and that we should be accentuating the importance of that moment where the site meets public square, does anybody here think that a two-story building, which is pulled significantly farther back off of that building envelope line that surrounds public square otherwise, that's the context that we should be talking about? There's a context of, there's a building envelope that surrounds public square. And what I see here is you've decided to pull a building back. So now we've ignored the context, which is okay if we have a really good design. And then you've given us a building which is 2 stories tall, which again ignores the context around public square. We have buildings which are 50, 60, 70 feet tall, that sort of lower density tier. We have a higher density tier of the taller buildings, which you went over, and we have a lower density. You don't meet the lower density. It's the model really kind of hurts, you know, this thing that there's no visual unification around public square, and we miss the opportunity forever. That it's the most important property, as it was pointed out, possibly in the United States, to fill in a missing tooth is incredibly important, and I'm just very disappointed that it's a 2-story semi-public but mostly not pavilion paint museum.
Rather than get a response from the design team, because I think you did address this. I'd like to actually open that question up to the rest of the panel, because I'm not sure there would be agreement with what Alan said. So how do other people feel about the discussion, the rationale for pulling the building back to maintain view corridors for the other towers that are there, respecting the terminal tower rather than crowding it, and the issue of that pavilion height, which may well be too small, but Krista.
Thank you, Jack. I wholeheartedly agree with Mr. O'Connell's comments. I think if you look at the datum lines that are of the surrounding buildings, and you look at historic photographs of buildings that have fronted public square, you're always looking at like a minimum 5-story building that 50, 60, 70 feet, as was mentioned. I think that's very important to hold that context and that line and that facade. I don't know, your map didn't indicate it as you showed earlier, but you mentioned the urban core overlay, and I don't know if that also applies to West Roadway or not. But I think just given the context alone, that is a very important build-to line that we need to hold. And I think the height and the mass should also reflect the surrounding buildings. And earlier you had mentioned when you broke down the tower, you had the base, the mid, and the top. And I think that base should also hold for this block as well. And, you know, perhaps this particular block, this Jacobs block, is not the appropriate place for the pavilion. I know you've kind of wanted to put that, you spoke to your reasoning earlier. But you've also shown this other mass that is behind the tall tower, and perhaps that mass would be more appropriate, that future phase of development, fronting public square, because that is more appropriate of a mass and a density and a height for that location. There potentially could be other locations for that pavilion.
Thank you.
Whether it's in the ground floor of the tower, or
Do you want to
maybe
speak
it's
to
a
that
crown
as well?
jewel to the parking garage to kind of dress that up a little bit. But I have real concerns about that Jacobs block.
Speaking to the same question, Dennis, then Mark.
So originally, ever since
Speaking your mic.
the Jacobs Tower that was proposed on Public Square for Con Peterson Fox, and then was negated by mergers, I always felt that there should be a tall tower on Public Square. I've kind of changed my thinking in recent times, and just before we met, I was taking pictures all the way around the model. And the thought that comes to me is that you needed a little more separation, just as was indicated by the architect, so that
Dennis,
when you're approaching...
in the interest of time, because I see we're running out,
Okay.
If you could get right to the point,
Right to the
please.
point. The point I'm making is that I think it's okay to have the pavilion there as long as it's at least 50 feet high.
Very good. Thank you. Mark?
Full disclosure, I'm not a big fan of sky bridges, and I agree with the point about the datum line, and I think pulling the datum line back in the tower reduces the linkage to Public Square. And the scale of the sky bridge, if in fact we have to have a sky bridge, relative to the height of the pavilion as it stands now, it's a dominant element. If the pavilion were taller, it would make the sky bridge less of an element, and I still wouldn't like it, but I'd like it a little bit more. So.
Thank you, Mark. Does anyone else want to speak to this issue? Greg?
I was just going to say, you've done a really great job of convincing me for why the tower could be back from like a zoomed out view like the model we're looking at. But at the ground plane, that's where I feel like there's a lot of stuff that's still not working. So the pavilion could be placed there, but why is that angle there? How does it relate to, you know, the paths in Public Square? How does that transition down Frankfurt into the warehouse district? All that stuff doesn't make sense when I'm looking at it here. But like I said, from the massing and the positive space view, you've convinced me, but here it's not convincing.
Let's move on. Mr. Yablonsky.
I'm okay with moving it back because other proposals for the Jacobs site did not control the rest of the larger site. And this allows there to be a stepped thing into the warehouse district. The other perspective I'm going to give you real quick. I lead a historic tour every Friday in the warehouse, in the public square. What I would want to know about the pavilion, is there a potential for public access on the roof besides that, where you could have an overlook? Because the sight line of seeing how buildings are placed is really good when you just stand up a little bit higher. That same thing happens in Cleveland at the top of Mall B. It's one of the most dramatic things you could experience. It's 29 feet up.
That's a
You
good
stand on that, and you have a whole understanding of Burnham's group plan. You don't have it at the ground level.
That's a marvelous idea.
If you put some public use in cafe on that place, the feeling of the square is going to be much better.
Thank you. Mr. Yablonsky, did you?
Yeah,
have
I
something
want to
else?
lead in, if you're done, I had other comments, real quick.
Yeah.
Your first question was the concern about the existing headquarters building. As I wear many hats. One of them, I'm the executive director of the warehouse district. I'm going to praise Sherwin-Williams. We have a historic conservation easement on that building as the warehouse district. So it's historic importance, its maintenance, its upkeep is guaranteed permanently, and we hold 67 easements, and their record of achieving compliance with us is in the top 2 or 3. So I don't think anybody has to worry about where this is going to go. That's point number one. One of the other points I was going to make, I've already made about the rooftop use of the thing, but I have another point about sky bridges. As I've looked at sky bridges, and I've gone to International Downtown Association conferences and National Trust conferences, some are way better than others. And the reason they're way better than others is two diametrically opposed thinking. One is they kind of blend in and you almost don't see them. So how can you make this so unobtrusive you don't see it? But the other is, I've seen places where they're almost iconic. They're celebrated as public art, and they're lit in a way at night where they become grand entry points into a place. I don't know what's the right way to do this one, but to me it's one extreme or the other. It's not a mishmash. So I would just throw that thought out.
Thank you, Tom. Mr. Zarfos.
Yeah, I've been on this committee for a long time, and every time I hear the word temporary, it gets my attention. In fact, I've often wondered if we do a little research and find out what the definition of that word is in Cleveland, because it seems to go on forever. I'm interested in the pedestrian experience, and one of the things I've learned, to make cities walkable, you can't be constantly walking along the edge of parking lots. This scheme, with all these temporary lots, will have about 1,000, I'm guessing, lineal feet of edge, and is designed to meet minimum standards, that minimum setback and a few trees. So my challenge to the designers here is, can't we do better? If this is a future development site, and maybe we don't even need this parking, but if we need it, let's do a better job. I mean, we're reinventing the car, let's reinvent the parking lot. It can definitely be better, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zarfos. We have 8 minutes left for discussion before I'm going to entertain a motion, and before I do that, I will hit some high points here of things that I think people have discussed that might want to be in such a motion. But I'm just giving people notice that we're getting to the end. Is there anyone else here who wants to speak to this? Just one brief comment. Director Collier, and then Mr. O'Connell.
Yes, just one brief comment regarding the pavilion. For me personally, the way the site is laid out, I felt that that additional open space in the plaza area there pulls you to the site. The fact that the building is set back off of the square, you need some type of horizontal element that draws you in that direction, and I think the actual site layout does that. I'm not going to say I don't agree with Mr. O'Connell, because I think there's some merit to maybe lifting that height up a bit. But the solution that, I don't know if it's a solution, but the recommendation that Mr. Yablonsky said is pretty intriguing, because that rooftop element, if you were to have one on that, could be something that actually is additive to the square, creating another view shed for, your employees and others, and it may even, play a part as to how you think about making a connection across. Don't know. But I know there's a design solution for everything. So hopefully when you go back, you begin to really explore that connection from the square to that pavilion to the actual tower facility.
Thank you, Director Collier. Mr. O'Connell.
Yeah, there was a lot of comments from the public about the Sky Bridge and speaking out against it, and I know we've talked a lot about it, but I just feel like, saying that it's critical for connection is not providing a justification for something which, as design professionals, we all sort of know that it's not good for cities. There's a reason why no cities are permitting these to be built, and they're in fact being torn down across the country, including in Minneapolis, Toronto, Stockholm. These things are not being built for a reason because they suck away the street life and do not promote walkability and livability. So I just want, whenever this comes back, we need a no Sky Bridge or a better reason why, you can't facilitate this connection with just better street improvements, better sidewalk improvements, better crosswalks. Again, the weather's not a good reason because these things are not permitted in Toronto. These things are not permitted in Stockholm. These things are not permitted in Minneapolis anymore. So what makes Cleveland so special that we have to do something which was proven a long time ago that they were bad for cities? If we're trying to integrate into downtown and not create a fortress, then why Sky Bridge?
But are those Sky Bridges connecting the same organization, or are those Sky Bridges connecting other organizations? Because to me, that makes a difference.
Past Sky Bridges? Or, because there's no current Sky Bridges being permitted and built.
Sky Bridges you're talking about, like in Minneapolis. We understand Minneapolis Sky Bridges are above street connectivity, urban connectivity. That's not what we're talking about here. We're not pulling people off of the street to use that Sky Bridge. People that are using that Sky Bridge are already in the facility. As Bill mentioned earlier, it is a horizontal vertical connection. So if the tower were to be on top of, or on top of the pavilion and the functions that are below it, it's essentially an elevator ride across a horizontal connection and to where you're going in the pavilion. The Sky Bridge in its current function isn't pulling people off the street that wouldn't be off the street already, potentially in the tower.
Thank you. Mr. Soltis.
Just to back up Mr. Connor, I do think, though, that having people downtown, giving them reasons to be on the street, even if they are, is great. So when you pull into a parking garage and then you go up to your tower and then you pull back in, like East 9th and East 12th are dead because there's parking garages in between the towers on both streets, so nobody ever has to walk on the street. If we have 100,000 people downtown, let's get them out on the street. And then the other thing is, in talking about like the detail that you did in this scale of design, which was amazing and wonderful and convincing, it would be nice to see that in this scale of design. And just as one example, so for the lobby that you have and this connection to Public Square, which I can kind of see, although some explanation is why you use those angles and those paths would be great. But then if I walk through that lobby, the Sky Bridge you're showing doesn't even relate physically or geometrically to this like beautiful kind of, trapezoid or whatever you have for the lobby. And then when I get to the other side, there's nothing on the ground plane that says anything about this connection. So those kind of things would be great to see. Like, what is it going to look like for me to walk through that lobby, to be on that sidewalk? And how can the street and the sidewalk for Frankfurt and all the other streets around here be seen as like part of Sherwin-Williams and like an activated space using best like urban design principles, best planning practices?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Soltis. You're absolutely correct in terms of, what does that feel like? We've just brought on board the landscape architect. That is the primary focus of what is happening at the ground plane. We don't have time in this meeting to talk about the organization of the lobby, why it is what it is. I will just make one quick comment, and that is, and forgive me, I used a small model, but in terms of integrating the Skyway connection, there is a very strong relationship in terms of the organization of the pavilion, and then it connects, and then this slot here that goes up, the entire tower is something that is quite intentional.
Well, and I would agree with you from an architectural and sculptural standpoint.
Yeah.
I can totally see it here, but how do I feel that as a human being on the sidewalk?
Right, and that's what we're doing right now, focusing on that, absolutely. The other quick comment on the Skyway, your comment with regard, you can there's two ends of the spectrum. I know exactly what you're talking about. I lived in Minneapolis many years, and there's 80 blocks downtown that are connected with Skyways, and they're all over the map in terms of their design. But what we're envisioning right now is that this is very glassy, very transparent.
Thank you. I'm going to cut off comments from the panel at this point because I think it's going to take us a little while to work out a motion. But I want to mention some things and then I will entertain a motion. The things that I have heard relate to the importance of a traffic study in collaboration with the City of Cleveland to ensure that the flow, ingress, egress of the garages, et cetera, is well worked out. I think that there needs to be consideration of a retail location and strategy which is stronger than what we have seen so far. The two most controversial things that we've discussed are the Sky Bridge, which I'm not sure there's going to be full agreement here relative to, but which needs to be looked at, but the pedestrian experience in particular on Frankfurt, and not just the vacated portion of Frankfurt, but the other portion of Frankfurt that makes its way up to Rockwell. The garage height at the first floor, which we would like to see be 20 feet to facilitate that retail discussion and give Sherwin-Williams some flexibility. Public access to the roof of the pavilion being one really important thought, especially relative to the height of the pavilion, which I think everyone feels is too low at the height that's being talked about right now. And finally, treatment of the edges of the temporary parking lots, which is to say that they may be there a long time, and maybe there should be more actual green space that is going to be really viable along those edges, at least on a temporary basis, so to speak. So those are the things that I have heard. If anyone wants to say that I've missed something, please let me know what that is, and then I would entertain a motion with whatever types of conditions people want to suggest. Mr. Yablonsky.
Only one thought we didn't discuss at all when you're building a skyscraper, and I don't know if it's part of the concept plan or not, but the way it's lit at night and the way it hits the city also is extremely important.
It will be, but that's not for
That's not part of
today.
this. Okay, just want to make sure.
Thank you. Is there anything else missing? Okay. In that case, I would entertain a motion to approve the concept. And Director Collier, if you can just enlighten us for a moment, when we grant conceptual approval, what we're doing.
Yes. So there are 3 approval levels with respect to how our boards, commissions, and committees operate. The concept plan basically endorses the general direction of a proposal. It does not mean that the proposal is perfect. The committee has the ability to approve a concept with a number of conditions that could be addressed at the schematic level. The point of design review is to ensure that the project moves and continues to move in a positive direction to get to the best outcome. The commissions hold the gavel with respect to that final approval when you get to that point. So for the committee, if you act today with respect to a concept approval, it can be conditioned on items that need to be further studied. You do not necessarily have to approve the entire package or proposal. You can actually approve elements of this with other elements needing further study as part of your condition. So I just wanted to lay out your options because this is a very complex project. I will add some commentary, although I don't vote on the committee. With respect to the tower, I think that the tower itself is a substantial investment, and it sits well on the site. And the massing that you showed, the direction that you're going, in our mind, is pretty impressive with respect to the dynamic nature of the building. So I have not witnessed anyone having issue with that tower. Most of the commentary was around that integration into the urban context, which is the sweet spot for everybody here. So those are the points that I think Mr. Bialowski illuminated, and those are the things that we need to massage. And as you move through the process, you can massage those things, and your response would be in that schematic, presentation back to the committees and the commissions.
This is a little bit unusual, but I want to suggest how a motion that I would entertain if somebody else wants to make it, which is that the concept be approved, excluding the northwestern block for the time being, but the concept of the tower and the pavilion site be approved with conditions that you come back with a traffic study in collaboration, a pavilion height increase and consideration of how the public might access the roof of it, and that when you do come back, we really want to see renderings of the street level pedestrian experience, and which includes the treatment of the edges of those temporary lots. This leaves the north block out, which would allow you to reconsider the issues around the garage and the retail. Would anyone care to make such a motion?
I'd make that motion.
Mr. Yablonsky has made the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second is from Mr. Geist. Now let's have whatever further questions or comments anyone might offer. Krista.
I just have a procedural question.
Sure.
Does granting conceptual approval lock in any way building locations, footprints, anything like that, or is this still just general direction?
It's general direction, but if we give, based on what that motion was, if you're giving concept approval for the site, that the building, for example, the tower, individuals are okay with that direction, then I would say that you are committing to that. Why would you go back from that if you're saying that you're endorsing that portion of the plan? With respect to the open items, it was very clear with respect to those things that have some ambiguity as far as consensus that need to be reworked. So I think the motion was pretty solid. And just to answer your question, if in fact you say or endorse a concept approval, it would be interesting to see why that would be reneged upon at any point. So technically, when you're giving those concept approvals, you're moving the project based on the specificity of whatever your motion is, if that makes sense.
Mr. Soltis.
Good question, though.
Can I add to when like seeing what it looks like on the street, like doing a circulation study? We're doing a traffic study, but can we do like a circulation study? So what are the pedestrian paths? How are people going to move through this site? And then relate that to our views from the sidewalk.
Sure. Mr. Yablonsky, are you open to that, adding that to your motion?
I'm open to that amendment. And the only question I have, by taking out north of Frankfurt, it's what you're taking out, right?
Correct.
So you're saying nothing about treatment of the potential walls of the parking garage. That just comes back?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Geist, are you agreeable?
I'm sorry.
Are you agreeable to adding the site pedestrian circulation study to the? Okay, so that is added to the motion. Mr. Parker.
Point of clarification. So there was a little bit of description of the articulation of the tower. That's not part of this.
No, it is not.
That would be schematic.
What we saw relative to the schematic was really, it was just a look ahead to give us some sense that we're not just these blocks.
Right. Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Anyone else want to? Ms. Curry, yes.
Carry it over to the next meeting. So it's conceptual approval, excluding the northwestern block. Traffic study in partnership with the city, that it would also include pedestrian circulation. Consideration of a pavilion height increase and public access to the roof. And lastly, entire site street level experience kind of addressing the treatments of the temporary lots in Frankfurt.
And demonstrating that through drawings. The two pieces that are left out, which would be part of the North Block, relate to a retail strategy and a garage height lift. Although that's not part of this approval, those are comments that you should bear in mind as you go forward.
Okay, I got it.
Krista?
Is part of the motion with that study of the pavilion height, does that also include the frontage of it along West Roadway and facing Public Square, or is that excluded from this motion?
I'm not sure I understand your question, Krista.
So we talked about, and I heard Lillian repeat it, with like studying the height and the massing of the pavilion. But I'm also wondering, is part of that frontage, that build-to line, holding that urban form closer to Public Square rather than having that large setback courtyard?
Yes, I believe it would be. I think the footprint is part of this, basically part of this approval, although I would expect that there are going to be adjustments to it as they go along, and particularly relative to Mr. Parker's comments about making those turns onto Frankfurt. I imagine there's going to be adjustments to how all of this will happen when it comes back in schematic. But in general, I think that these locations are what are being approved in this motion. I'm going to call the question. I'll ask Director Collier to call the roll. Nay.
Bialowski?
Yay.
Benton? Yay. Bogart? Boyd? Brown? Geis?
Yes.
Long?
Yay.
O'Connell?
No.
Parker?
Yes.
That was a
Persharkin?
yes.
Persharkin.
Krista?
No.
Schwarzenberg? Sosis? Yes. Vanderwill?
Not present.
Yablonsky?
Yes.
Zarfas?
Yes.
Zarnes? Okay, motion approved.
Motion is approved. Thank you, everyone. Director Collier, do you have comments for what happens next?
Yes, at this time, we're going to go into our second recess as we prepare to entertain the commissions at this point. The deliberation time will be roughly an hour, maybe shorter, depending on the commission's response to the committee's recommendations. Thank you. Thank you all.
40 years, huh?
Alan.
That's why I'm retired.
back to order. First order of business is the roll call.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Anderson,
Here.
Ms. Bailey,
Oh, here.
Mr. Bonezzi,
Here.
Mr. Bowen, Mr. Kalikia,
Here.
Mr. Collier,
Here.
Ms. Downing, Mr. Dreyer,
Here.
Mr. Fluker,
Present.
Mr. Jones, Ms. Curry,
Present.
Ms. McCray Scott, Ms. Paul, Mr. Slife,
Present.
Mr. Strickland,
Here.
Mr. Tarasik. Here. Ms. Trott. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Don. We're going to start similar ground rules. We will ask that you raise your hands, and Carl's going to maintain a list of which we will go down the list and take questions and ask the presenters to address them as we go through as well. First, I just really want to thank you all. It was really an excellent presentation, and as is stated before by Jack, just so proud of the city and what you're doing for the city in terms of this very important and generational change that everybody has wanted in Public Square for a while. So thank you, and we're really excited to work with you. And this is going to be a collaboration for the next few months, as you know. And so I thank you for that openness and willingness to work together on what is one of the most important projects that we've seen in a really long time. So thank you, and let's get started.
Questions?
I know August has some questions, so we'll start there. If you would like to go after August, just signal down here, and we're going to start a list. So.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Good morning. Yeah, still morning. This is actually a charge to this administration or the next administration. I think it's vitally important, considering the billions of dollars that's going to be invested in and around this square, that these streetscape around arteries studied. Ontario, Superior, and Frankfurt. It's vitally important. And those experiences are less than desirable, in my opinion. And when we talk about front doors, in my opinion, the square is the front door. And obviously the lake has its other challenges. But I know the burden shouldn't totally fall on Sherwin-Williams, but I ask that the administration start looking at that sooner than later, in my opinion. Thank you.
A couple of things I want to just reference to Mr. Fluker's comment with respect to the front doors and the circulation. There is a downtown mobility study that's going to be taking place, working with NOACA, DCA, and others to look at the downtown system. So the points that were made is valid. I think the infusion of this number of employees can also be additive to that analysis. So that study is underway, and we'll talk further about potentially, integrating or being informed by whatever comes out of that analysis. Thank you.
Alan?
Thanks. The first thing I want to say is not really dealing with this particular project, except it is. And I just want to say to Sherwin-Williams that as a member of the Landmarks Commission, I have a great concern about what happens to your present complex. I think it's one of the most endearing sort of landmarks that we have, and as part of the Terminal Tower complex. I realize that you can't respond to that because you don't really know what's going to happen yet, but I just wanted to say that for the record. I'll jump right in and just say a couple things about the proposal. I think there's a lot of things to like about it. I'm just going to bring up two things. You can certainly put me in the camp that the pavilion needs to be a bigger building than it is. I think the pavilion building is maybe as important, if not more important, than the tower. And, for many years, there hasn't been a building on that site, and it's been like a missing tooth in Public Square. And now you're in the unenviable position of completing Public Square, really, with that building. So, so I think I just think a two-story building isn't going to do it. Then the other thing is, because this is a conceptual review, I'll talk about the Sky Bridge briefly. Conceptually, I don't like the Sky Bridge. I don't like sky bridges in general, and for a lot of the reasons that's been talked about. But if it's got to be a sky bridge, make it something. Don't try to hide it. I think that's the mistake a lot of people try to make. Make it part of the architecture. Make it something, because you can't hide it. It's going across quite a broad street, and so make it wide, make it colorful. I don't know, make it something that really adds to the whole complex.
Giancarlo?
Good morning, everyone.
John, speaking to the mic.
Oh, sorry. In conjunction with what Mr. Dwyer just said, I like the concept of the Sky Bridge, but I see them as more dramatic. I see them more like a river, obviously Cleveland is famous for its river, for its bridges. So just to make a walkway, it's an opportunity to make something really, really interesting, as he suggested. And that would be maybe a lingering place. Maybe just instead of thinking in terms of people walking from one place to another as quickly as possible, maybe it's instead of it's almost be like walking on the street, encountering and maybe even some kind of a gathering place as people interact with each other during the course of the day. So I'm in favor of the idea of the Sky Bridge. I just would like to see something much more architecturally pleasing. Again, we're building a future landmark for the city of Cleveland, an amazing concept architecturally and socially. It's changing the downtown area of Cleveland. So anything that we can do to encourage that community element and that visual pleasure would be, I think, really appropriate. And the other thing that I would like to talk briefly on is I'm not sure what the difference between the tower lobby and the pavilion lobby is. I mean, I think I know, but I'm looking at the, again, going back to, I'm a sculptor, I'm an artist, so the idea of color always fascinated me, and the research that goes into creating colors. And that's something that Sherwin-Williams has been doing for over 150 years. So the idea of maybe a museum-like structure, again, more involved with the public in the pavilion area where we can show some of the mysteries of color and the research that you've done for over a century. And maybe using possibly some equipment or some things that you have left over in the older buildings to create more of a public space that includes a library concept, a museum concept that can be, again, another addition to the community of Cleveland.
Wow, that's interesting.
And then we mentioned briefly the concept of the front door. Where is the front door of this complex? What would be considered a front door?
Front door is here at the pavilion.
Right.
The way that we think about it, it's the front door for Sherwin-Williams, and the way that it opens up to the public square is the front porch of the public square. If you're a visitor, this is
Right. Okay, well, thank you for now.
Can I make just one comment?
Sure.
Relative to color. We work for lots of different corporations. This is the first corporation we've worked with.
Yeah.
They're all about color.
Right.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So how to integrate that
Into the architecture. In the lighting.
Yeah. It's a huge, yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Well, just a reminder, we've heard from the audience that to please speak as closely to the microphone as you can, because online they're only able to hear if you're close. Robert, and then we'll go down the list.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, good morning. I thought it was an excellent presentation. I hope that the comments that you've received so far and our comments will help to just enhance this project. I wrote down that the CEO's quote was to bring to life who we are. I think it's critically important, and I'll just elaborate a little bit on Giancarlo's comments, about creating a inviting public space. So not just visitors of Sherwin-Williams, but totally, I mean, you're on public square. We need to engage the public. It's part of the name. I think it has to be a huge element of that pavilion. And the building, I think, should be bigger and be programmed to really invite the public in and tell the story of Sherwin-Williams, of who you are and what it means to the city and how much the city embraces Sherwin-Williams. So you have that opportunity. And so I think the motion that passed, the recommendation that we get from the Design Review Committee, and it's just a recommendation, we don't have to act on that specifically in our motion, but it did exclude the parking garage, and I think for the reasons that were articulated, and I agree with that element of the motion. I think that particular design element needs to be studied in much greater detail to provide more flexibility and opportunity to really be an enhancement to the overall solution for Sherwin-Williams.
Thank you. No comment back. It's okay. If you don't. Yeah. We could. Raymond. Oh, sorry. There's keeping a list. So we have Raymond first. And then we're going down the list. Raymond first.
All right. Thank you very much.
And then Bailey.
And thank you for the presentation as well. Just one comment when it comes to the sky bridges. I don't have any opposition to sky bridges myself. I completely understand the need for the sky bridge across Frankfurt for the parking and to have your employees have that direct access into the tower. The one question I have, though, however, and this is coming from the perspective of a downtown resident, right, and somebody who walks downtown and goes from one side to the other and down into the flats and so forth. Frankfurt Avenue between West 6th and West 3rd, as we sit here today, is pretty much a dead street, if you will. There's parking, there's not very much traffic, and quite frankly, not very much pedestrian traffic either. When you're going from one part of town or from the center of town down into the flats, you're quite frankly crossing that block through the parking, the flat parking area that's there now. So my question is, was any consideration given to that retail liner being placed along Frankfurt Avenue as opposed to West 3rd to continue to draw people from that public square area in that specific direction down into the warehouse district?
Yeah. I mean, actually, we really hadn't put, we knew that we needed to do, by code, we needed to do something along West 3rd. We hadn't really talked a whole lot about what it would look like going down Frankfurt. We do know that is, we wanted to maintain it as a pedestrian walkway. I think we definitely have we just engaged our landscape architect. I definitely think there's some opportunities to improve what that looks like. Certainly needs to be paved for sure. But yeah, I mean, that's something that we could potentially look at.
And the reason I say that is because much like there are entrances into Playhouse Square, the arches into Playhouse Square, and there's definite entrances there, that might be an opportunity as well as an entrance into the warehouse district through that corridor. It just seems that if there was something drawing people towards that Frankfurt Avenue, the pedestrian traffic would rather go that way than up West 3rd for that retail. So that's my only comment.
Okay,
for thought.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Commissioner Bailey?
Hi.
A little bit closer, if you don't mind.
Oh, can you hear me? Oh, okay. Your project is kind of unique because you have 3 different, locations, and you're trying to connect everything. One of the things I have several, but one of the things I want to comment on, you're trying to use the pavilion as a gateway from Public Square, and And many of the comments I'm hearing, one of it is my concern is trying to draw the pedestrian to your location, but it's mainly is your employee. And I'm assuming a lot of them gonna use their cars, and some may want to use the RTA to get to your location. So I'm looking at the yellow part where it says Pavilion Lobby, and I'm just wondering, have you thought about maybe that portion of it, just the first floor level, making it into two separate entities, and just have it open, just to walk through on the outside, and the rest of the level enclosed. And that way, on the outside, you can continue walking to across the street to get to the tower. And I don't have a problem with the sky, but I agree with the comments about blending in with the rest of the building. Don't just put a sky bridge and it's just thrown in there and it doesn't blend in architectural. That's one of my comments. And I did hear earlier, and I need someone to correct me if I'm hearing it right. In the earlier presentation at 9 o'clock this morning, you were also using the skylight as your main entity to bring your utilities from the tower to your pavilion. Am I hearing that correct? So, okay, so do you have a backup? Let's say something happened to that bridge. Yeah. So I'm used to having utility go in the ground. So that's my comment, having a backup plan on that one. So that's when the tunnel issue come under there. So that's one of my main comments. So if I have any more, I'll just bring some. I just have a lot of notes. But those are my two things that I am bringing up. So that's what I have for now.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I have lots of notes, and I've been known to talk very quickly, so I'm going to try to be not so quick in how I talk. The first thing, I love that you guys did a project in Oklahoma City. And I usually get my point across through anecdotes, so I'm going to give an anecdote. Oklahoma City was, in the time when you guys were building that project, was rated as urbanistically the most unwalkable city in the entire United States. Similarly, I think you guys completed your project in 2007. Was it, or it started around there? It started in 2007. I think it was 2008 or 2009. Jeff Speck, the writer of what was known as the Walkable City, and the concept of the Walkable City from the New Urbanists was brought in to redevelop the urban core of Oklahoma City. And that was a fantastic thing that happened for the city, and it was in conjunction with that also brought people to, losing my words, to the city. So what I'm saying is that in conjunction to the tower being a way of economic development, what happens at the street level and the way that people also interact with the buildings is equally important to the economic growth of a city as a whole. And so with that being said, I know that Director Collier had mentioned that a study is going to be done of the traffic patterns, which, as someone who does live downtown, I lived about 3 blocks away from where this project is going to be, I think it's going to change a lot of your perception of the way that this kind of is structured. But I also see it as an opportunity to restructure the way we think about this entire block, which goes into my second anecdote, which is history. So not many people know, not for just in this room, but maybe people watching online, is that Terminal Tower, as we love it, is unfinished. It was not finished in the 1920s because we hit this wonderful thing called the Great Depression, which would have had another tower next to it. In about the 90s, there were 2 large buildings called, I took notes because I'm terrible at names, the Ulmer Building and the Marshall Building, which were about 11, 13 stories that kind of capped off public square as we know it. And behind that was about close to 100 very, very small buildings that were basically eradicated in the 90s. So we have a lovely history of unfinishedness in this city, and which sometimes gets lost to history. But I think the project, as it stands right now, and the idea of the, which I understand business, right? The speculative nature of what's going to happen behind this site. So if it's not going to be a building at the moment, I think included in when that transportation study happens, that it needs to think about that first phase as, maybe it will be longer than a year, maybe it will be longer than 5. And we need to think about how that's going to affect the urban context of everything that's happening around this site. So I don't know if my anecdote gets my point across, but I think the study of the way that people and cars and the relationship of the size of those things is step one, and then really taking it as a challenge to redesign the way we think of those proportions and redesign the way we think of, this is how big a street needs to be in conjunction to the pedestrian way. And I think this whole committee and this whole administration would agree, what is written right now doesn't have to be the way that we always do things. And I think this is a milestone moment to redefine what we as a city believe to be what a street is and what a correct walkway is. And maybe this is the catalyst for doing that. So I know that we had brought up, we're maintaining minimum code variances. This is not where my expertise comes in on the law and these things, but I'm thinking more in terms of the ethos of culture. And so I would take it as a challenge in the next phase to say, if everything was off the table and I really wanted to change this, what would you guys do? So that's my challenge. I know you can't come up with an answer now, but even just seeing the conceptual challenge of say you took all the cards and all the rules off the table, what would you really want to do? Because I think this is a moment when we can all say, this is what really should happen, and not being held back. So that's my first comment. It's long, I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you. Sure, go ahead.
First, thank you for your comments, Mr. Bonizzi. So you're absolutely right about Oklahoma City, the most unwalkable city in the United States. And you may recall, I sort of fast forward last year, is now a travel destination, right? Well, and I mentioned in the presentation about 8 miles of downtown, which I believe you're familiar with. And so the Devon project was the trigger for that. And that's something that the city advanced. And just by way of association, the landscape architect for Devon and for all the redesigning of downtown is the same landscape architect that's just been brought on board on this project.
I'm actually very happy to hear that.
Thank you. Councilman Slade, and then August.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation, and thank you to Sherwin-Williams. I think everybody said, but it's worth rehashing that it's this company's such an institution in our city, and we're happy to see them and support them and watch them grow and create new jobs. This isn't just about a building, but this is about many of our neighbors who work for Sherwin-Williams and really stabilizing our city moving forward by keeping them here. I will be brief, is what all politicians say, but just a couple things to note. One, I want to begin by agreeing with August and making a charge back to City Hall about our downtown road system. When you're coming from Ohio City and you crest the top of the bridge and you look down at the width of Superior Avenue, it's so comically large that it almost makes the city look empty. And I think that there's a lot that we can do in addition to this project of making people feel as they come into Cleveland that they're coming into the urban core and not coming into something that feels uninhabited or not busy. A charge that I believe that our committee should put back on the project is really a timeline for the retail liners. As it was mentioned in the previous committees, there's a number of examples around downtown where space has been left for that type of development and it hasn't occurred to date. I'm thinking, across from the Galleria, a couple other places, and it's difficult to predict when Sherwin-Williams would have the demand or the need to construct a second tower on the 135 space lot, but I think more in the near term, it's possible to put on a timeline an ability to construct that space, to activate it. As the director said, there's an opportunity for kind of spin-out businesses and other things that are maybe unique to this type of business that wouldn't be applicable if maybe we were building a tower for a law firm or another type of use. Moving down the list, I agree with all the comments about the elevation of the pavilion. I would like to see it larger, and I guess what I am wanting to compare it to is if you go catty corner across the square, none of us think of the BP building as being set back from the roadway, but the truth is that there's a very large atrium, and I measured it on Google Earth, roughly, let's say, 230 feet from the roadway of Public Square until the elevation of the tower. This is a little longer, obviously, because there's West 3rd. It's about an additional 100 feet, but it's possible, as you're standing on Public Square, to view this pavilion and not see it as part of the larger structure and incorporate it within the larger structure, even though that might not be true necessarily if you were to walk behind it. The only link would be the sky bridge. The other question I have, and this follows up on a comment that Mr. Parker had made in the previous session, the design of Public Square, the angle of Public Square is really pulling people towards Frankfurt, and I understand pragmatically, looking at this design, why the pavilion is shaped as it is. There's this large open area that moves towards Public Square, but I'm curious if there were discussions about doing the opposite and having it angled towards Frankfurt. And in that scenario, the southern side of the pavilion, the southeastern corner, would line up with the northeastern corner of the Renaissance across the street, and it would move to kind of move people towards Frankfurt. It would open up the patio in front of 55 Public Square and preserve their sight lines of the square and the skyline. And in addition to the elevation, I'm just wondering if there's an ability to repivot this building so that it doesn't cause the pedestrian moving towards Frankfurt to kind of feel like they are now coming into a cavern, that's just a natural progression. The last couple things, the vacation of Frankfurt between 3rd and 6th. My preference would be in an ability to maintain this as a kind of a robust pedestrian access. I mean, on weekends, is it possible to do ingress and egress off of 3rd into the parking garage solely so that this is maintained as just a solely public access for pedestrians? But also, since we're dealing with a paint company and speaking on the council side of the building, there's been some frustrations in the past about ideas of using paint within roadways as public art, and I think that this could be a cool opportunity. Instead of feeling like you're in a cavern, it's a larger public art experience, and the roadway could be incorporated into that if it is to be vacated and no longer under the sole discretion of the city of Cleveland. The last two comments are, I think this project, as all projects, should be held to a public art standard, but since this is a paint company, since it's a well-known company, I'd really like for there to be some interactive public art and within the right-of-way, within the public realm, not solely within the pavilion. And I think that there's ways to engage the site with the public in that way. And then lastly, I'm optimistic that a second tower will be built, but as someone noted, temporary in Cleveland can be a pretty loosely defined word. So to that end, I believe that these committees should hold a pretty hard line on what the streetscape interaction with that southern parking lot is, if that is what moves forward, including transit waiting environments, because the reality might be, Jonathan, I'm 34, so temporary for this site has been my entire life, and I am optimistic that it's not going to take 34 years for additional development to happen in this area, but I also realize that it's not within the next 5, so we should treat that lot and its interaction with the pedestrian in the city as somewhat permanent for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go to Dr. McCray Scott and then back to August.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My main concern is the traffic pattern, actually, and make sure that you have, because it's going to be really critical to the project, particularly on Frankfurt Avenue. It's just so narrow there. And I just want to make sure that your traffic study takes into account not only the pedestrian traffic and the automobile traffic, but your loading and your unloading zone there as well, because it's very, very narrow, and you're going to need a lot of space. That is one component that I was concerned about. Secondly, I was concerned about the residential. You said you would eventually have some residential housing included. Where would the parking be for the residential component that you're contemplating putting in this project? And thirdly, lastly, it's really important that we engage the public and make sure that every aspect of this project is user-friendly for the public as well, because this is the public square, and that's really important. Thank you.
Thank you.
So to answer that one question, the dimensions that have been left for future development have been set up to accommodate those future uses. What it ends up being remains to be seen. But on St. Clair specifically, that dimension from St. Clair to the wall of the parking garage has been set up in a way that it could accommodate future residential. Along West 6th Street, between West 6th Street and the west wall of the parking garage, that dimension has been set up where it can accommodate ground floor retail at a national level, as well as office above. So the dimensions that have been held are being held to promote future development and not hamstring any future developer from not possibly being able to do what they would like to do.
Thank you. We have about 20 more minutes for comments, so ask that people not repeat too much, and then we're going to need a little time for a motion. So August, and
Sure.
then...
Sure. To the applicant, Madam Chair, you mentioned that you're going to have a landscape architect. That's great, but I consider what you're trying to achieve around the square, around all these buildings, is urban design and not landscape architecture. So if you could speak a little bit about that. And I just want to echo the importance of the public realm. I live near the Cleveland Clinic, and I'm not comparing you all to the Cleveland Clinic. It's a very insular institution. Hospitals generally are. And the way it sounds like this facility is going to be used, once people go in, it's not likely they're going to be coming out. So that the urban design component and not landscape architecture and creating opportunities is of paramount importance. Thank you.
Okay. We have another comment from Giancarlo.
I'd like some clarification on this Frankfurt Avenue. Frankfurt Avenue has always been a rather dysfunctional street in Cleveland. It's been more or less a walkway to late-night bars and or to get down to the flats. So I'm curious about that one area between the two buildings. Will that be close to traffic where it says vacated Frankfurt Avenue? Will that be close to traffic or remain open?
Yeah. Our vision is that once this is vacated, that we'd put some type of bollards across there so that it would easily be walkable, but it would not be open for pedestrian or
So it will be
vehicular traffic.
it will be like a park-like environment, right?
Excuse me?
It'd be like a park.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a walkway. Now
Yeah.
the way this is set up,
Yeah.
our employee traffic
An
would come in the
opportunity
morning,
for
would come
great
in and
outdoor
enter the
space.
garage and exit on West 3rd Street at the end of the day. There would be loading, so I mean there would be, in essence, traffic to here somewhere, but it would be primarily in the morning and when we're leaving at the end of the day.
So we would be creating a park-like environment there then, a pedestrian walkway?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely want to make sure that's, because actually that's a way that a lot of our employees will also be coming in. You know, if they park on the lower levels of the garage, they'll be walking across. If they park in any of the other lots that are around here, they would also be walking down that Frankfurt. So we definitely want to make it pedestrian friendly.
So essentially, Frankfurt remains as a pedestrian thoroughfare,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
is closed to vehicular traffic.
I think it's a great idea. That's good. Good. Sure.
I just wanted to respond to Mr. Fluker. We agree with you. Landscape architect, urban designer, the firm that has been selected is both. So those issues that you're concerned about, that we're concerned about, will be addressed at the highest level.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With my philosophical comments out of the way, I will now give my really direct ones. The first one is, what are the dimensions of the larger sky bridge that spans West 3rd at the moment, roughly? Or is that not known?
I think what you use right now, 15 feet wide.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then on Frankfurt Avenue, from the parking garage to the front face building line of the office tower, what is the building separation there?
What's the distance?
Yes.
Great question. I would.
From here to
right here.
Right there. Yep.
Yes.
Good.
60 feet. The right of way is 42 feet.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there. Thank you.
Pulls us towards the buildings. We're talking about it right there right now. We are evaluating it because, again, like we discussed, we still have more traffic studies. Thank you again. I tried to just yell. We still have more traffic to study, and I think it's come from design review and also from this joint commission. The traffic's very critical here. I live and work downtown, so I can appreciate that. But these dotted lines on the plan here represent the existing right-of-way lines, and that's 42 feet. So
Okay.
we're perhaps 5 feet back on either side.
Perfect. And then my last comment is about the public plaza, which is, I'll be very direct here. After living in Europe for about 8 months, I understand public space and its relationship to use very well. And a big problem is when people say a space is going, we use these things like, oh, it's going to be very public and it's going to be very useful. And then, surprise, it's not, because we all just speculated that it would be. So my my charge is to think really of a way other than use and program, because program is determinant on time. Right? This lobby is, I'm assuming, not going to be 24 hours a day. I'm assuming its uses aren't going to be 24 hours a day, of ways formally and architecturally, as not using the word program, but as an architecture to create public space here. That's my charge there. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple comments, and so does Freddie, but anybody else? Just wanted to see if anyone else has any additional comments. Okay, thank you. I'm not going to reiterate anything, but I just wanted to say that I think what I appreciated about the presentation today, and then a little bit of discussion, that brings home for me the idea that you articulated, that the pavilion is acting as a front porch. I mean, conceptually, that's just a brilliant idea for me. And I think in the comparison to the Huntington Building or BP Tower, I actually think this iteration of the two buildings has more opportunity for more life and more because they are separated. And I didn't really appreciate that until today, just in terms of that huge opportunity. So I just want to challenge you a little bit more, just because I love the metaphor. And I think that Tom Yablonsky's idea about the roof is brilliant as well. So to maybe push the envelope now between concept to reality in terms of how the spirit of front porch can be enhanced. And just a couple ideas, but don't take them for what they're worth. But one, the veranda is fairly small. There's a larger veranda I saw on the tower that faces Superior. The roof might change that. I challenged Sherwin Williams to think about the idea of the public access to the roof that doesn't have to come through the building. This idea that this can become public space, I think, to that question. I think that could be transformational, truthfully, for the city and for Sherwin-Williams to be the one to give that to the city, sort of more public space, this new view shed that, as I said, Tom, that was just brilliant from his. The second thought is just one of the concerns I'd had with when we were thinking about the mall and the new convention center was the couple simple things that happened that turned out to be not so good, right? The Abompan was placed not on the mall side, on the other side of the corner, and then just the life, So this retail liner is really interesting because you would think instinctively it belonged on West 3rd, but I agree that you should really think a little bit more about that. And the reason for me is that I now see Frankfurt, the possibility, and I know you're going through the vacation process, but in addition to pedestrian, I think bike access and articulation of bike access and how it is articulated, it could be one of the most charming streets. And I can't believe I'm going to say that, but if you really, this could be so charming. And that's the way I see it, like front porch and then charming. And I can't believe I'm saying that up against a tower, but I think it's possible because you actually have all the elements and so I appreciate that we didn't, the recommendation was not for the garage block yet, because I think there's some magic that you guys can put together here with some uses that we normally don't get in cities, right? A possible retail liner, a vacation of a street that's going to require pedestrian access. I do think the city needs to bring 55 Public Square to the table, and we really need to help rethink Frankfurt and the portion there, because it's not their responsibility, but it's huge. So I just say that I'm excited. I think there are some exciting transformational opportunities here to be what you said, which is a catalyst. And I think the catalyst now I can see is not just in terms of jobs and economic development, but a design catalyst for the future of the city. And so I'm excited for what might come. More comments and questions there.
Can I ask just one follow-up question? We've been talking a lot about this retail liner, and I come from a development background, but I also would view this as being a little challenging, along West 3rd. If we were to take that and draw that along Frankfurt, is that something that?
Yeah. I would vote yes. But I'm not the only one. But I would vote yes. But I would say also, it's also incumbent on us and the city and Downtown Cleveland Alliance and others to help you guys program that successfully in terms of what could go on there. Like it's going to take a little bit of community work, but it's possible is what I'm saying. Like we've got to work with you to make sure what could go in there.
If this were developed, obviously, this would be a more natural corridor than up along West 3rd.
Yeah. All right.
One quick comment.
Freddie, and then Giancarlo has one more. We'll keep going.
All right, so I want to just kind of double down on the Frankfurt conversation. From our position, just so you know, we would prefer that the entirety of the block is lined, period. Okay, that's a preference. We know that the reality of transacting that now is an impossibility at this point. What we're talking about is priority now. You always got to decide, okay, what do you do first? Now, we're not in favor of not having some type of retail on our major corridors. We can't have blank spots on these major corridors, particularly when we have opportunities to infill them. That does not negate the importance of Frankfurt in the opportunity. So even if it takes maturing and building out the site to that point, that should be the North Star. So is that fair?
I don't know. I think we're going to have to debate that one,
all right.
honestly.
So the other couple of points I want to make with respect to Frankfurt, that you're keeping the pedestrian in mind with respect to that cut through, and I hate to use the term cut through. The fact is that it breaks up a super block, right? So having that pedestrian articulation there, I think, is important. The question that I did have was with respect to the actual building footprints themselves. And this is why the request was made in the previous meeting to have a rendering that shows what that streetscape activity would look like, particularly for your building itself. your thousands of employees are going to bleed down to that first floor at some point in the workday for some reason or whatever, whether it's coming or going or whether it's activity during the day. The public needs to be able to see that activity at the street level. So just talk to me about the glazing on the perimeter of the site, particularly at the ground level, because I think that's going to be very tremendous with respect to that interface with the actual public realm.
So relative to the material palette, we're just at the beginning. What I can tell you, and what I'm saying right now is not anything that has been reviewed with Sherwin-Williams, but by reference, typically what we would do at the ground level is that the glass would be very transparent, and so you see activity inside the space. So, but we're not there yet on this project, but it's consistent with what we do on other projects.
Yeah, so keep that in mind because I think that's key. The other thing is the Superior Avenue refresh, because there needs to be a refresh of Superior Avenue. I agree wholeheartedly. I think everybody around the tables agrees that you have to deal with Superior. That's key. Out of any connection, that Superior situation needs to be dealt with. The other thing I want to ask is that, look, cars are not going away. People need to understand that, but they will transition. So electric vehicles, we know that many of the industries are going all electric. Will you have accommodations for that in your facility, in your garage, on your site? How will that work?
Yeah, well, we are making provisions to have electric charging stations in the parking garage.
Okay. The other thing, this goes back to what Chairwoman Curry was talking about with respect to the retail, but also with respect to the housing development that Ms. McCray brought up. There will need to be partnerships, obviously, with community and economic development to really help to recruit, businesses and really start to recruit development interest for development on those sites. The notion of having the mixed use and the residential, particularly on the St. Clair side, if you walk on that St. Clair side and you take a stroll, you look on one side of the street, it actually feels like a neighborhood street. And if you start to build that out, that other side where the parking lot is with residential, you'll have a residential filling block in the heart of a downtown. And I think that's a huge opportunity that people underestimate with respect to that side of the street. And then lastly, I just want to, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I mean, what a wonderful opportunity to be able to have 7 acres to build a tower, a front door.
And a neighborhood. Yeah, that's tremendous. And then the other thing I want to just throw out there is with respect to, you mentioned bollards for Frankfurt. If we can rethink the type of solution other than bollards, because there are options for things that would be rated appropriately, that provides that separation that you would need, that are more aesthetically pleasing than bollards. I was in Europe and I actually saw some, I don't know what they were made of, but they had to be durable, but they had bollards. They were kind of like a brushed aluminum type of a look, and they can actually go down into the ground at time. They were amazing. Yeah. And I'm just thinking with a building that's as attractive as the direction that you're going, every aspect of what you do should have that appeal as well.
Well, we've actually been talking about, like, what does that really look like? What does that feel like? Because, obviously if you got a truck or something stuck in that Frankfurt, you'd want to be able to take the bollards out, make sure that they can pass through. So you need something that can, be mobile, but attractive. And it's not like we're really trying to stop a tank from going through there. So yeah, we're open for suggestions on what that might be.
Thank you.
Okay, Giancarlo.
Yeah. Again, I actually am amazed that you're able to put this package together, because basically these are lots that were part of previous projects in Cleveland, including Dick Jacobs's, like we discussed briefly before. So, but it's also the last 2 or 3 pieces of a puzzle. This is it as far as public square is concerned. So the opportunity to do something really beautiful, amazing, and not only for Sherwin-Williams, but for the whole community, for the entire city, is just sitting there to be developed, to be discovered, And I agree with what they said. I think, this idea that we have an opportunity to make that public square truly a masterpiece of architecture for the country, actually, not only for the city of Cleveland. It's just waiting to be developed, I think.
Okay, last call, and then we're going to try to resolve a motion. Anybody else? Yes, Michelle?
Thank you so much. I'm going to make this brief. It's been a tradition in the city of Cleveland to commission sculptors or artists to adorn the buildings, these iconic buildings that we've built throughout the decades. I was wondering, have you made any considerations for, maybe commissioning some artwork or having a competition, especially since you are, John Carlo brought this up, you are a paint company, so I would think we could enhance the structure with some very colorful artwork. Just wanted to hear some comments on that.
Yeah, we actually have had those discussions. In fact, we've got I think some of you that might have come to our office, we've shown a mock-up area, and we've actually commissioned some art pieces that are all the Sherwin-Williams paints, and then we have a little legend right by it so you can see what paint colors were used. But yeah, I think the idea of taking, incorporating art obviously into our branding is it works. It's a win-win.
I think from a grant perspective, the opportunity exists. Bill mentioned at one point in time, this product will be a beacon of Sherwin-Williams products. And how we use them moving forward, the sky's the limit. There's metal coatings, there's concrete coatings, there's aluminum coatings. I heard loud and clear painted steel bollards at West 3rd Street. Probably not the right opportunity, but maybe we'll take that off the list. But the point is the brand, is the ability to portray brand will come in a number of different ways. Products, coatings, art, relationships, basically.
I'd say Commissioner Slice's idea and the city giving you permission to paint Frankfurt we ought to give you some kind of exclusion from the city's requirement not to paint streets. If there was ever a street that deserved to be painted, it would be Frankfurt. So maybe we could add that to the motion. I'm just kidding, but I'm up for it. No, but I'm actually being serious. Like, if there was a street that should be as vibrant, the street itself with your street paint, that should be it. So, all right, so here's what I think we're going to do. I'm going to need someone to make a motion. You can add to, if you agree with the design reviews motion. So I'm going to reread, and Jack's going to correct me if I don't get it right. And then I'll need someone to make a motion. You can add to it, but in addition to what design review's motion was. So design review gave conceptual approval, excluding the northwestern block, for issues of restudying or rethinking the retail strategy and other issues around the block. So that block does not get conceptual approval. A traffic study that would take place in collaboration with the city and include pedestrian and bike circulation as well. So not just about cars. And that would include people coming to and from the facility itself as well as passing through. The pavilion height, there was a general consensus that it needed to be increased and consideration for roof access. I think we added, hopefully, public roof access. And then lastly was to actually, through drawings, really demonstrate in this next level of development the street level experience, including the temporary lots in Frankfurt and the entire streets that surround, with the desire for obviously enhancing those as we've all discussed today. I get it, Jack?
Yes, the last one was relative to the temporary lots, potentially to increase the amount of landscaping.
Yes. So not only showing them, but really enhancing them, since temporary really means interim is probably a better word than temporary. Interim use parking lots. All right. Anybody want to make a motion and/or add to it? You may. Oh, that wasn't the motion, by the way. That you would be making a motion with those considerations.
So I would add a condition that the design of the Sky Bridge, be a primary element and be, an architectural feature, not just a horizontal circulation function.
Bridge of size in Venice. The bridge of size in Venice.
He said the comment was to add consideration of special design of the Sky Bridge. I'm not sure we should dictate what that is. I mean, I think they hear us. It should be extraordinary. It may or may not be a super hyper transparent bridge. You don't know how you're going to go with it, but that it not be a kind of mundane off the shelf Sky Bridge, I think is what you're hearing.
Can I add a provision to the traffic and pedestrian study that it not just have graphic representation, but I would love to see the data to back it up, not just assumed drawings, the actual. I would just want to see the numbers and the data that backs up with
the
it.
city will require a traffic study data analysis.
Can we add what study on the utilities going through
The utilities.
Can we add more information on the utility going to the Sky Bridge? And I would like to see more information on options backup on the Sky Bridge, the utilities.
Purview. I'm not sure if that's in the purview of this commission, these commissions. I think what I heard today is that there will be both utilities going through the Sky Bridge as well as backup in addition to it. But honestly, I'm not entirely sure, unless there's a design consideration there that it's within the purview, but.
Okay. All right, that's fine, because that was brought up in your presentation.
Okay.
I think we have to remain conceptual since it is a concept, really, and not to get too deep into the details at this point.
All right, so does someone want to actually make a motion?
Yes. I'll try this. Should be simple. I move to adopt the motion from design review session earlier today with the added amendments as stated herein.
Okay. And the added commitment was coming back with additional design considerations for the Sky Bridge, and it's a sort of.
And the pavilion.
And this, what was the, I think that was the only one I'd heard.
The pavilion was part.
That's it.
Right.
Yep. Okay, so we have a motion to adopt design reviews comments as I stated, with additional comments about the design of the Sky Bridge being special. I'll just use that term. And I'll need a second.
I'll second.
All right, we have 2 seconds. We'll give it to Raymond. So we have a design and a motion and a second. We'll need to take roll.
Okay, you ready?
Thank you.
Anderson.
Yes.
Anderson. Bailey. Bailey.
Yes.
Bonizzi.
Yes.
Kalikia.
Yes.
I actually have to vote. Yes.
That would be the alcohol roll for you.
Downing. Oh, she's not here. Dreyer.
Yes.
Fluker.
Yes.
Jones. Curry.
Yes.
McCray Scott.
Yes.
Slife.
Yes.
Strickland.
Yes.
Tarasik.
Yes.
We have a.
The
Affirmative.
motion passes unanimously. I really want to thank you again. I think we all thank you, and thank you for the partnership and openness, and we look forward to working and seeing you soon.
And I'm going to close the meeting by saying to our listening audience, this is the first of 3 iterations of presentation that you'll be hearing. And we will be back to you at the next date for the actual schematic review. And we would like to thank everyone for tuning in and thank the presenters from Sherwin-Williams, as well as thank all of our committee members. And I would also like to send a special thanks to the Planning Commission staff, who was very instrumental in organizing this very complex, complicated endeavor. So thank you all.
Thank you. That's an understatement.